Hi and welcome to this course on HTML and CSS. Now, the one thing I always find in common with many training courses, not just in HTML but in all kinds of computer programming languages or other tools in fact, but the one thing that is in common is they theorize, or they go through all the theory first, and personally that frustrates me. Personally, I just want to get going. I just want to start doing hands-on stuff. So my thought in this course and what this course is about is that we do all that interesting things up front to create a web page like this one that's on the page now. There's me, by the way. And we do all that first. We actually create something and then we look at a little bit of the theory after we've created, sort of the theory to reinforce the creation. So we create something and then we look at the theory, and that way I feel you get to know and understand a little bit more about the process, about the code, because what you're doing is you're actually writing it, you're creating it, you're playing around with it, and then you afterwards look up, oh well, that's what that command does, etc. It's the kind of theory is there to back up what you've already learned. So that's what this course is. That's what this course is about. My name is Sean. As I say, you can see me there. I've been in software development for, well, too many years. I've done many different languages. I started back creating web pages in 1994. So I've been creating them for many years. And in this course, I'm going to give you a good introduction into creating your own web page. HTML5 and CSS3 are great tools. They allow you to easily create content for your web page. In fact, HTML5 is the easiest HTML that's been out ever, in my personal opinion. So, without further ado, let's get on to that first lecture and start creating something. Before we begin, you're going to need an editor, something to edit that HTML and CSS. So for this course, I'm going to be using brackets.io, which is by Adobe. It's free. Go and download it now. You get some great plugins as well. In fact, I've added a couple of plugins, and I'll just show you those now. We've got 2 that I've installed and 2 that I would like you to install because they're very useful. The first one is HTML templates. You'll see why that's useful soon in the next couple of lectures. And the next one is W3C validation. And again, I'll show you why we'll use that in a little while. So that's brackets. Go and get it now and then get on to the next lecture. Okay, so we've got our editor. Let's go and create something. And the first one we're going to create, first page we're going to create, is the most simple page you can create at all. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new folder. I'll call this new page. Okay, again, see a little bit of how to in brackets as well. And then I'm going to create a new file and just call it hello world.html, just to say there's HTML file. If it's a HTML file, the browser thinks it's a HTML file, it'll load it. And we're just going to say hello world. We're not going to put any code in there at all. Now if I click this little icon here, this tells the brackets to open up a browser with the page that's, well, here. So let me just click that now. Opens up Chrome. And there you go. Hello world. Very simple. Kind of proves that you don't need to have the HTML code for it to actually display in a browser. The browser still is able to show what's in there. Notice the icon down here. this is the W3C validation. At the moment there's an issue because it's saying it's timed out. Don't worry about that error at the moment. You'll see when that becomes useful pretty soon. So let's continue on to the next lecture where we're actually going to create some HTML. Okay, so let's create a new page. And I'm going to call this one index.html. Now there's quite an important significance to that. Index.html is the first page that the browser will look for when it goes to a website. You must always have an index file, index.html or htm. Okay, so that aside, we've created this new index.html. Now, first useful plugin. Go to Edit, HTML templates. HTML5, which is what we're going to be using here. And there you go. It's actually populated the code for you. It's giving you a head, a body, a title. All we need to do there is we're going to use a p tag. Note it auto completes a tag, and I'm going to put in there hello world. P is just paragraph. Okay, just saying it's a formatting of the text. You don't need to have that P around it, but any text you put in, it's good to have some formatting, and the P tag does that for you. If I now execute that, run that, the browser, no loads, and there we go, hello world. Almost identical. You notice there's a little bit more space above in this new page, and that's because of the formatting the p tag has given us, but otherwise it looks identical. So it's a good thing because we actually are using proper HTML code now, although it doesn't really seem any difference from the web page point of view. So well done, you've just created your first HTML5 page. How easy was that? So at this point I just want to quickly talk about why we downloaded the W3C validation tool plugin. It's very simple, because if I delete some important parts of this document and then I go to validate it, just refresh the validation, I get an error. It's validated that there's an actual error with my code and it reports it. So by using this plugin, you know that all the code you check and validate, if it's correct, it will be fine. You'll get a nice green tick down here, and if there's an error, it will report it and you can go and fix it. So if I was to put that back and then I go and refresh it again, we get a nice little tick down the bottom there. There you go. So, very useful plugin. Okay, although I said at the beginning that we're just going to get into the code and we're not going to really hang around too much on the theory, I thought there was a couple of things that would be very useful to talk about just at this moment. The first one is, and it's all about the structure of the page, and the reason why it will be important is because later on, for an example, you might want to pull in something like AdSense or Analytics, and it might say enter this code in the head. Okay, so this is just why we're going to talk about this now. So the first thing is the doc type. The doc type tells the browser what type of document it's loading. So when they move to HTML5, they went from this very sort of complex almost doc type to a very simple HTML. So it's just telling the browser that this document is a HTML5 document. Very simple, very useful, because the browser is kind of pre-warned, or if you want to call that, to know that it's going to be having to decipher the code that's within this HTML document. Next we have the HTML open and close tag, and in between there is where all the code for your HTML page is going to be. So this is saying we're starting to create some HTML, and this is saying that's it, that's the end of all our HTML code, end of our web page. The next thing is the head, and that is telling the browser everything within here is to do with the head of the page. So you've got things like a lot of meta types. In this page, it's only got the character set saying it's UTF-8, and we've got the title, and that title is a title that goes in the top of the browser. So at the little tab at the top, this bit here, if that's actually in the title. And the last thing in here is the body, and the body is where all the code goes for your web page. So it's kind of saying to the browser, this is where the body of code for my page is. Now in the head you can have a number of different things, as I say, JavaScript, etc. Some plugins like Analytics and AdSense, etc. say that you need to put a bit of code in the head, and then you put the code in the bottom of the body or whatever. But in the case of this course, we're not going to do much of that in the head. We're really going to be just putting code within the body. That's where your main web page is going to be. So I just wanted to clear that up now very quickly, the different sections, because as we go along we're not really going to talk about the sections. We're going to be concentrating on the actual HTML to create your page, and then the CSS to nicely format that page. It was brought to my attention by one of the people taking this course that they were getting an error whilst trying to create a new file in brackets, and I can reproduce that error and show you the fix. So the error is, if you remember, I said right click over here and create a new folder. So we'll try and create a new folder and then enter, and this error appears saying an error has occurred when trying to create the new directory. The reason is, and I'm not sure if this is just PC Windows related or Mac related as well, but the reason is we're trying to create a new folder in this directory here, getting the started directory, and that is not writable. A very easy thing to do. Go to somewhere, I'm going to my documents, and I've created a new folder called brackets code. So we create that, create it wherever you want on the hard drive. It's just I've created it in my documents folder, and then go here and open folder. I don't want to save any changes I've done there. And then what you need to do, you need to go to that directory, if I can remember where I put it. Okay, select that folder, and now we can create new files, and we can create a new folder, no problem whatsoever. So if you see that error, just follow this, and hopefully that will fix the problem that you're getting. Okay, carry on with your next lecture. So at this point I thought it'd be a good point for us to go and do our first assignment. Assignment 1. What I want you to do is, firstly, if you've not already done that, download brackets and the 2 plugins. And then what I want you to do is I want you to go away and create this page, just like we did in the last couple of lectures or so. Just create the HTML5 page, have the hello world, and then open it up in the browser. See, very simple, easy assignment, but let's do that now before we move any further. Okay, so let's start creating our new web page. So that we don't forget, let's change the title. New web page. Okay, just to change it so that when we next see it in the browser, we'll see that. Now, what I want to do first is I want to start using div tags, or tags rather, that have been specifically created within HTML5. So the first one we're going to use is called header, and that's where you're going to put all your header code, such as the logo image, the menu, etc. And then the last one in the page is going to be the footer, and that's going to be where you put, say, it's like copyright mine, you know, as an example. So that's the last thing that's going to be within the web page. The other tag that was added is a thing called section. Now that's just any section. You can have a number of sections within the web page. So we could have a section, and then we could have say a div. Just put this down a bit so we can have a bit of a tabish in there, and then that's one div, and then we could have a second div. In fact, I'm going to have to tab these up a little bit because we want it to have nice indentation so we can see where everything is. So let's just tab each one of these up a little while. Indentation is good because you can actually see in the subsections where it is. You can get a better understanding of how the code is pieced together by seeing the indentation. So all I've done there is I've actually created a couple of sections, a couple of tags. I've got a header, and then a section with a couple of divs, and then a footer. And in fact, you know, I can actually add another section in here if I want to, and then I can always have another div in there as an example. Now, as we go along and start creating this page, I'll probably tidy this up a little bit because I have an idea in my head how this page is going to fit together. I've got a drawing which you can't see. And there's a couple of sections, there's a menu, and a couple of divs to have text in there. So we've got a couple of boxes. As we go along, I'll explain each section, and then I'll explain how we're going to create this into the web page that we want to have at the end. So just for this lecture, understand that we have these tags: header, footer, and then section, and this is where we're going to actually start dividing up the web page to create the nice web page that we're going to have at the end. Okay, let's start structuring this page a little bit. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to delete this bit here for the moment. And what I also want to do is I want to have the page centered. I'm going to have around a 960 pixel page, and that's going to be centered in the middle of our browser. So to do that, what I need to do is I need to create a div, and what I do, I like to call this container. So I'm going to give it a class, and it's going to be equal to container. Now this will make sense as you go sort of towards the end, because at the moment, whilst we're not using the CSS, it won't make much sense. So let's just close that div off. So now later on when we do the CSS, we're going to actually center this whole container class div that's going to center everything that's in our web page. Okay, so now we've done that, let's go and structure our header a little bit. So let me just create some lines in there. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another new div, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to give this an ID called logo. This is where our logo is going to be a little bit later on when we actually get around to creating it. Okay, and then once that's done, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create again another class. We're going to create our menu. So to do that, we're going to create a thing called an unordered list. Unordered list is a bullet point list, but there's no order, no sort of structure to it like A to Z, 1 to 5. It's just the order that we create. So again, we're going to give this one a class type, and we're going to call it nav menu. And then in there we're going to add these things called li, which is just a list item. Okay, and then what I'm going to do in there, we're going to have a href, and what that does, it defines a tag to a web page, a URL. In this case, it's going to be the item that's going to be the page in our website. So as an example, the first one we're going to say is going to go to the page that we're creating now. So that would be index.html as an example, and then we're going to call that home. Okay, so the menu item will be called home and it links to index.html. But a menu wouldn't be very good if you've only got one item. So the next item we create and we say link to, this would be another page, but at the moment we're just going to put a hash in there just as a kind of a holder, and that would be, say, our next page that we create, and let's call that one about me. Okay, so that one will be called about me in the menu, and then let's create one more called contact us. So again, li a href. Again, we're just going to put the holder in there of a hash so that we can define that later. When we create the page, we just come back and actually add the page to this page. In fact, this menu is something we'll probably copy through all our pages if we were to create multiple pages, so we have some consistency. So let's just call that one contact us. So there you go. You've just created your navigation menu and you've put in a div for the logo. Now let's just save that off, and then if I was to click this, it'll load up the page, and there you go. You've got your 3 items which are going to be your menu. As I said, it's an unordered list. These here, don't worry about bullet points because it's a list, it adds those bullet points automatically, but when we come around to actually doing the CSS code later on, we'll be redefining how this list is, how it's sort of viewed on the page, and we'll be removing those bullet points and we'll be doing some other items with it. But this are links and they go to wherever they're supposed to go to. At the moment, as I say, those 2 only go to hash, which means it looks at the same page again. So there you go, you've just created your header and menu for your new web page. Okay, just to expand on the last lecture, let's actually add some extra items for this menu so we can see the menu in action. So I'm going to just create 2 new files. One called contact.html, and it's going to just have a contact us, just a bit of text just to show this in action. And then I'm going to create another one called about.html, and again we're just going to go about us. Very simple pages. Then in our index, I'm just going to change this one from the hash to about.html. So it actually even knows, it can see it in our file, so it auto completes for us. And then this one's going to be contact.html. So let's just save that. Go back to our page. I'm going to need to refresh this so it picks up the new settings. And now if I click that, you can see about and contact us. Okay, so you can see that the menu works very well. Okay, it doesn't look too much like a menu at the moment, but it works like a menu, And that's the point. At this stage, we have a nice menu set up. Okay, so let's continue with the creation. So in this section, what I'm going to call this, I'm going to give it an ID, and I'm going to call it main body. Okay, because this is where our main body of the page is going to be. It just gives me a nice place to put everything. So we can interchange with divs and sections, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to really just continue with divs just to keep a little bit of consistency in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have in this first div an ID, and I'm going to call this one welcome div, just to give it a nice div name as it was. And then all that's going to be in there is a h2, which is a header 2 tag. I'm just going to say welcome, if I can spell, to my page. And then in the next div I'm going to have another ID, and this one is going to be called newsletter. Equals newsletter. And the idea is this is going to be a little section where they could sign up for a newsletter or something a kind of along those lines. And then below that I'm going to have two more divs. Just put a bit of space. I'm going to have div, and I'm going to call this one left, because this is going to be on the left. Okay, and then one more, which you might guess I'm going to call right div, just because this one's going to be on the right. And what these are going to be, these are just going to be two sections, two divs, if you want to call them that, div sections. They're going to be where I have two blocks on the page where I'm actually going to be putting sort of information or pictures or whatever. You know, this is just kind of sectioning up the page now, just to give you a nice idea of how you would actually section up a page. And you can have, as I say, text or pictures in either one of these sizes. We've got a nice newsletter section here where people can sign up, and we've got a nice welcome section there. And if I was just to save that and then go to here, you can see already it's actually started to actually show you what the page looks like. As I say, at the moment it doesn't look like a lot because we've not got any formatting, but this is actually the structure of our page. Once you start seeing what you can do with the CSS, that's where you start doing the nice work to kind of put the prettiness to the page. So that is more or less our first HTML page created, the body of it. The next work we're going to be doing, we're going to be actually tidying up and putting some nice formatting to it. Okay, at this point I think it's a good place to do our second assignment. What I want you to do is, like in the first assignment, go and recreate this page. I'll be adding my version in the resources so you can actually compare against it, but I want you to go away and just have a go, create this page, and then get ready for the next section where we're going to be actually doing the CSS to start formatting the page nicely. Before we start working with CSS to style our website, there's a couple of things I really wanted to go through just to kind of give you a feel of what we're going to be doing. CSS is a great tool to style our website, but just so as you understand some of the aspects, we'll cover this bit of information up front. Try not to make this too technical, too theory based. The first thing is about internal style sheets, inline and external style sheets. So internal style sheet means we have a style open and close tag in our head, and in there we actually do the CSS. So we actually, for our classes, IDs and tags, we have all that information in the HTML file in a style sheet, or in a style block, as it were. So every HTML page would have this inline style sheet, style block, as I say, open tag, close tag, style, and the information for styling that particular web page. Inline would be where we have the actual style in the line itself. So instead of having class here, we'd actually have the CSS styling on the line. So each individual line you actually do some styling for, you'd have there. External style sheets, which is what we're going to be learning within this course. I like to feel is the better way of doing it is actually having an external file, .css file, and inside there you have all your CSS styling code. So all the CSS will be written in this file and then loaded into the web page that is going to be using it. So in theory you could actually have one CSS file and have several pages use that one CSS file. See how that's better? Instead of actually having it repeated, if you were having sort of an internal style sheet, for example, repeated in every single HTML page, you actually have one CSS file and load it into several HTML pages. So that's just a little bit about CSS, internal style sheets, inline and external. You can use a combination as well. You can actually have an external style sheet and have some inline, and in fact have some internal as well. So you can actually have an internal style sheet, external and inline. But as I say, in this course we're going to be using external style sheets, and we may have an example of what inline looks like. So if you want a bit more information, do go and actually do a search. There's some great information, especially on W3 School, and you can actually see a little bit more information on the theory side, more than what we'll be covering here. So the next thing I want to talk about very briefly, and we'll see this being used when we're actually in and creating the CSS, is how we write CSS for the particular parts within our page, such as ID, main body, class, nav, menu. So the first thing is elements. So the element selector is things such as the p tag, or in our case here, the header, footer. These are elements. So in the CSS we would actually have the footer, and then we'd have a open brace and the code, and then a close brace. The next thing is ID. Now the ID is a unique. It should only have one ID per HTML page, and when we actually are writing the CSS, what we have in the CSS is a hash followed by the ID name. So we'd have hash main body, and then open brace, the CSS, then close brace. The final thing is the class selector, and the class selector can be used a few times, multiple times in a web page. And in the CSS, the way we actually write that code is we have a dot, a period, and then that's followed by, again, the name. So example, container, open brace, again then the code, and then a close brace. So those are the three different things we'll see in the CSS. We'll have elements which have just the name, we have ID which have a hash followed by the ID attribute name, and then we'll have a class which is a period followed by the name, the class name. So these are just, again, to give you an example of when we're writing the CSS, you'll have a quick understanding of what each is, depending on if it's nothing, if there's a period, or if there's a hash before the actual name. So that's just a little bit, as I say, and let's get on to start writing some CSS. So the first thing we need to do is create a new file, and let's call this one styles.css. Note the .css naming, and then in our index file we're just going to load that. So within our head we have a link to say this is a link to a file. So rel is style sheet, so spell that right, style sheet. The type is of text CSS. We can see actually that was being filled in there for a second until it text CSS, like so, and then href is equal to my styles.css. So now we save that. That will now load in our styles.css file, which is of type text CSS and is a style sheet. So that's how we load in an external style sheet into our HTML page. You'd have one of these lines in each one of the HTML pages you are loading in your style sheet. You can have more than one style sheet, so I've just called this one styles.css, but you could have like an about styles, a contact styles, a hello world styles, or you could have just one style sheet and load it into each page. So that's loading an external style sheet into your HTML page, and the next thing we're going to look at is start using this to style our website. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the color of the background of the body of my web page, the overall background. Now, because body is an element, we just call it body. We open a brace, and then I'm just going to go background color. We can even select it if you like from there, and I'm going to actually use an element called ghost white, just an off-white. We semicolon on the end there, and then we close just like that. So there we've actually changed the background color. Now, in actual fact, if I wanted to, I could do background color, and then I could actually start writing a hash value for the color. So we'd have, say, hash. I could have FFFFFF, for example. That would change it to whatever color that related to, or F0, E0, etc. So you could actually use specific colors if you knew the actual color, and sometimes you actually have a color selector within the tool itself. It doesn't look like brackets has that, but the easiest way to do it is to actually go to a color selector on the web. There are plenty out there. Find the color that you want, note down the hash value, and then you can enter it here. Anytime you add a color, use a color tool within CSS, you can actually use the hash value to actually use it. As I say, in this case, I'm just going to use the ghost white. So if I save that, and then I go back to index, and then we actually look at index. The background now you can see is well, actually you probably can't tell, but there's actually a different colour. It's a ghost white. When we actually start looking at the centering of the page, which is what we're going to do next, we'll have a different colour, and then you can actually start seeing the different colours that we're going to be using. So that's just very quickly how to do any work within the body of the web page, in this case changing the color. So the next thing I want to show is how you would have your actual web page to take up 960 pixels, which is a good usual size for a web page, and then have that centered so that no matter what size your browser opens at, the web page will always be in the center. So if you remember, we actually had a thing called container. If we go back to our index, here we go, we have a class called container. Now if you remember from the earlier lecture, we said that if you use a class, we start with a period and then followed by the class name. So in this case, we have a dot container, or container, we start with dot container open brace. Now then, the first thing we're going to do is set the width, and we're going to set that to be 960 pixels. Px means pixels. We can use percents if we want to, or we can use another thing called EM, which is another measurement of size in our CSS. I like to use pixels because obviously you get an idea of on pixel sizes. So width of 960 pixels, and then next thing we want to do is margin, if I can spell it, and then set that to 0 and auto, and there we have it. That is all the code we need to center our container. Now at the moment you probably wouldn't be able to see much if I was to actually browse that page now, because we have the very close similar colors. You wouldn't be able to tell that it was centered, if it was a separate page or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to change the background color at the moment to a nice light grey. Let's use that one. Save that. So now if we were to browse this page very briefly, we can see we have this ghost white background color, and we have the centered page. We bring that down a bit there so you can actually see it. We have the centered actual web page, where we have this nice grey background, and inside there we have all our divs, which again we can't see at the moment because we've not styled them. So that's actually how you would set the width of your web page and then center it within the overall page. So the next thing I want to quickly look at is, let's start working on our menu, our nav bar, making it a little bit more like a nav bar rather than a list. So let's go back to brackets, and if we remember, our nav menu is what the class is called. So let's go dot nav menu open brace. So I want to change the list style, and I want to just set it to be none. Okay. Now, first of all, let's just save that. You can see what that does. We'll do this one step by step for now, so you can actually see what this is actually doing to the menu itself. If we refresh that, you see that now we've lost the dots at the very beginning. So again, the first thing we've done, that removing that list style removes those dots. I want to set our margin at the moment to be 0, and I want to set our padding to be 0. Now again, if I just save that, we just refresh this page. And then what we've done, we've moved everything across so that now it's actually on the edge, like so. Okay, so that's the first part. Now our nav menu consists of an unordered list and then list objects. And what we need to actually do to style this is we need to actually start working on those particular items as well. So back to our style sheet. First thing I want to work on, the LI element. So we've got nav menu, and then I want to actually work on the LI element within that class. So I could actually just work on all LI by actually just doing LI here and then open brace, etc. But this is saying that I want to actually work on the LI elements that are part of the nav menu class. So it's being very specific, and you can do that with CSS. You can actually be specific to the particular LI elements in this case for particular classes or IDs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make them a min width, and I'm going to use 8em. Remember we said that em is a size in type, and I'm going to make them float left. Float just is talking about how you position them on screen. Again, we're not going into the full details of these. This is how you actually do the code, and if you want to research more on these commands, then please do go and have a look. And then I'm going to set the margin on the right. And the thing about doing the margins, you could be margin as in all, like here. This is actually saying set all the margins to a 0. And here we're being more specific. We're saying we want just the margin on the right to be set. I'm setting that to 0.5 em. So the right of every LI element is going to have a margin of 0.5 em. And then I want to text align, and we're going to do that to be centered. And what that's going to do is it's going to align our text with the center of the LI element. Save that. Take a look at the page, and there we can see now we have this home, about, and contact us all in a row now. So it's actually looking more like a nav bar. You will notice that this welcome to my page has now gone up along that, and this is to do with the float. The problem with float is that once you use it, every element is then after that is actually affected by this float. Okay, so float starts the positioning, and then every element after that will be affected by that position. And the way we fix that is we actually have this this thing called clear. What we do, we actually create a class, so something that you can use lots on the web page, because remember we said ID can only be used once in a web page, class can be used lots in a web page, and we tend to call it clear. And I'll do this now so we can make the nav menu look nice and clean. And all we do is we say clear and both. What that's doing is actually clearing the float element, so that it actually resets back to its original spot. So whenever we use this class, everything after that is now setting the float to be back to normal, not left, right, or however we set it. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail about this. This is actually about showing you how you create the page, and then you can go in your own time and do a little bit of research on this. So if I save that now, and then what I have to do in the index page, I need to actually have a div with that clear in it. So it's at this point we want that clear to be effective. We want the header to be for the nav menu to be fine, and then what we want to do, we'll have it in here because we don't mind it being in the header. We could actually have it after the header, but all we're going to go is we're going to go new div and then class equals clear, and then we can just close it straight away because we're not going to do anything within that div. We just want it to clear the floating position. And then if I go back to the web page and I refresh, we can see it's gone back down onto the next line because the floating position has now been cleared and it's all nice and looking more like a navigation menu and a nicer web page. So that's how we start to style our navigation menu. We're going to do a little bit more on this later on, but at least it's actually looking more like a navigation menu now. So we have the start of our navigation menu, but let's continue styling it a little bit more, make it look a little bit more like the sort of navigation menu we see or expect to see on web pages. So back to my style sheet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to style a few more elements. So first of all, we know we're going to style our nav menu, and it's going to be li, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to style the a link, and what I'm also going to style is the nav menu, the list element a visited. So this is to style the href link and the visited. So whenever you see a link, i.e. the what our menu is at the moment, and the visited, is going to be both styled according to this. And also note that I'm actually using a comma here. You can actually comma separated various elements of the element you're styling, in this case the nav menu li, and you just use a comma, and then they both would use the block that you now create for your styling. So that said, I'm going to style the background color, and in this case I'm going to use aqua just for now. We can always change colors if we need to later on. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to display block, display to block, add some padding of 0.2 em. I'm going to remove the text decoration. I'm going to set it to none. That'll remove the line underneath the link, etc. You know, we're just going to look like some nice text. I'm going to do the font weight. And I'm going to set that to bold, just to give it that little bit more stand out a bit. And I'm going to set some margin, and with margin you can actually set it to be everything, i.e. just 0. You can, in this case I'm going to set everything individually, so top, left, right, bottom and left, or you can say margin left, margin right, or margin minus left, margin minus right, and do individual values. But in this case I'm just going to do all in one go, so 0.2 em and 0. So that's styling the top, right, bottom and left elements, or adding margin I should say. And what I want to do is I want to set up some border radius, and I'm going to have to do this 3 times using WebKit Moz and just the standard border radius, because certain browsers need certain plugins to do this. So Chrome and Mozilla might use different actual plugins to do this, and then some would also just use the bog standard HTML border radius. So in the case of this sort of styling, and this is not just the only one, you have to do this a number of times, 3 times, using the different web kits. the first one is WebKit border radius of 3 pixels. The second one is going to be Moz border radius of 3 pixels, and then the final one is just border radius of 3 pixels. So we've got the 3 different ways of doing that. They're all the same, it's just that depending on the browser, some may have to use this WebKit, some may have to use this WebKit, and some browsers will just use the standard HTML5 border radius. It just covers all batches, you know. And the last thing I want to do is I want to actually add some shadow to my boxes to give it like a 3D look. So I'm going to go box shadow. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go 3 pixels, 3 pixels, 3 pixels, 3 pixels to give them 3 pixels again, left, right, etc. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually also going to add a color for that, and I'm going to use RGBA, and this is going to be the color of our shadow. So I'm going to go 43, 43, 77, 0.5. Now you might want to actually use a different shadow color. You can. I'm actually using RGBA value to do this. I'm doing it all within the same box. You don't necessarily need to, but just to give you an idea. Done. Okay. So now let me just save that. And let me go back to our web page. And now you can see I've got this nice actual menu box here. All looking lovely. What I'm also going to do is I'm also going to just nav menu A, so the A element. I'm just going to go display of type block and width of 80 pixels. I'm just going to be setting that as standard, so all the nav menu A elements are going to be of display block and have a width of 80 pixels. Again, let's just have a look at that. And all it's done is actually reduced the size of that menu buttons. So there you go. We've actually now changed the menu, made it look a little bit more like buttons, sort of the expected menu bar. So let's move that on further, and we'll be doing some more changes in the next lecture. Okay, so let's just take a moment and do a little bit more additions to the web page as opposed to doing the CSS. Let's get a logo in there so we can start making it look a little bit more like a web page that we want. So just go back to the index.html. You can see I created and added a logo PNG file here. So all we're going to do is we're going to do an ahref, and then we're going to go just put the hash in there to say come back to itself. And then all we want to do is we want to go image, so I see is equal to, just do it logo, close that off, just save that very quickly, come back to our web page, and there we go. We're starting to get a little bit of a feel for our web page. We've got this nice logo there now. We just need to start tidying up a few things to make it all nice. Start to make it feel a little more like a web page that we want. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go and add a little bit of colour to the different elements, divs on our pages. Let's start with the header. So with the header, because it's a normal element, and change the background color to be a medium kind of a medium grey, so let's just go grey. Let's have a nice grey. Okay, so now on our web page we've got a grey in there, so we can actually see that element of the web page. Now, if you remember correctly, we also have our main body, welcome div, newsletter. So let's go and do all these. Okay, so you can see that I've obviously made the header background color grey, and then for my main body, welcome div, newsletter, left div and right div, again I've made them all grey. Now, because I don't have elements or things within some of them, you don't actually see them on the page, but if I went back to my index and I put here sort of within a p tag, so left div, okay, so we can actually see this now start to take place, or take shape I should say, and then within right div, let's just add another p tag and then call it right div. And if I go back to my web page, I can refresh. I can see my left div and my right div. And then it'll be the same if I put some elements into my welcome div and also my newsletter div, because I already have something in my welcome div. Now, the reason I've done this is so that we can start putting some design to our web page, and we'll be going forward with that in the next lecture. So continuing on with our web page creation, the next thing I want to do is I want to style this newsletters element. The whole idea of this is that we would have somewhere where we're going to have sign-ups for people to leave their email address, name, etc., saying, you know, register to receive the latest email or the latest newsletter email. So what we would have, we'd have a few input types, and the first input type we might have would be of, say, type text. Its name may be name, for example, where we want someone to enter their name. And then we might want another input type of email. Now, the great thing about this is that by putting a type of email in HTML5, it sort of kind of validates that it is actually an email. If we put something that isn't an email address, then there will be an error about that, and we'll see that when we've actually got this all up and running. And then we might say with the name of this, again, we can call it email just to give it a name consistent. What we might actually want between those is we might actually want a bit of a space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this line break just to put in a break in between a space in between each one of these elements, so that we have a little bit of spacing, a little bit more neatness. And what we might want, we might have again a couple of breaks between this next element, because the next thing we want is a different input type. And what we want this to be is equal to submit. And what submit is actually a submit button. And again, let's just call this submit to be similar. So what that actually has now given us is an input type of text called name, an input type of email called email, and a button called submit. So So let's just save that. Go back to our web page. And here we have it. We have our little section. This is where we put, say, our name. This is where we put our email address. And this is where we click the submit button. I'm not going to put the code there's at the back of this within this course. This is just to give you an idea of how to set that up, and then following forward we're going to actually style the page, and that's what this is all about really. This is about all the styling the page. So that's our contact us div with the elements now set up. Okay, so now that we've got all the divs set up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding a little bit more styling to the page, putting the elements how I want them, and then I'll talk through that with you. So let's go to my styles. So with my welcome div, I want to make sure the float is left. I want to make them width about 70% of the page. I'm going to add a margin on the right. Have about 20 pixels. I'm going to add some padding around 15 pixels. So let me just save that. And then now we can see here we have our welcome me to my page over on the left, and then my submit for my newsletter over on the right. And then obviously we have this style in here. What I want to do next is just do some styling to the next elements in the page. Okay, so next let's look at the newsletter, and again let's just put the float left. Let me make the padding to be 15 pixels. I want to set the width to be 20% of the page, and the margin at the bottom to be 50 pixels. Okay. And the other thing I'm going to do very briefly as well is I'm going to go back into my index here, and I'm going to add at this point my div class equals clear, just to clear down that the styling at that point, so that we can then not have the float affect my left and right div. So again, let's save all that. And now if we look at my web page, we now have our nice left and right section here, and my div left and right here. What I'm also going to do actually very briefly is I'm going to go back to my styles, and I'm going to just change some of the color here. I'm going to actually make the colors a little bit different. So I'm going to make this one a hash E8088, and I'm going to do the same for my newsletter. And in fact, I'm going to do it I'm going to leave my two divs grayed there at the moment, but I may change the colors later on with that as well. And the reason is, now that I've changed the color, you can actually start seeing the difference in the sections. So we have a nice floating section here and a nice floating section there. In fact, I can also go back here, and in my welcome div, let me set the margin left to be 10 pixels, so that now we can actually see it really floating here. So you can start to see that we actually are making the elements float, and we will be actually doing that with a few more things as we go through by changing some of the colors. In fact, let's go back here and take this color. Let's go to my menu header, and let's just actually add that to there as well, just so we get some nice colors or sort of elements we can see through. And then let's just go back there, and then at the bottom of that we're going to add some margin at the bottom, and let's make that say 30 pixels. Save that. I like to save just in case. And we can start to see we're actually really kind of making some changes to the web page now. We can change the colouring as we go through, but just the fact that we can start to see the floating bits that we've got going on here, and the changes that we're making to the page to get it sort of back in with the colour we want. So that's our two elements here sorted, and next we're going to start looking at changing the colours for the elements here and affecting our left and right div. So that'll be in the next lecture. Okay, so now that we're actually colouring and changing the different elements and sections on our web page, what I want to do is, where before we actually had our container a light grey colour, I'm going to make that a ghost white. Just delete that, because now we want to actually have no distinction between the container background and the body background, because what we want to do, we want to give the illusion of these elements of floating. So if we go back here, we can now see that this element of floating, and then that will give us a nice feel to the page. Once we've finished, it's all going to look like it's floating away. And the other thing I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start adding box shadows. So they're all going to be the same. They're all going to be 10px, 10px, 5px, and then I'm going to have a colour of 888888, and let me copy that one. I'm going to put it in not the logo, but we've got in the header, sorry. I'm going to put in the main body, or not main body, but welcome div. I'm going to put it in the newsletter. I'm going to actually have it on the left, and I'm going to have it on the right as well. And then in our main body, we're going to leave it as it is. let's go back to our page, and what you can see now is we can actually see these shadows appearing. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to go back. You can just about make out the shadow there. I'm going to go back to here, and I'm actually just going to comment out this part of this code. You can see I can comment with this /* */ there we go. So now what we can see is we've got these floating elements. Now again, as I say, we've got a lovely bit of a floating element there, lovely floating element there, and then the left and the right divs are floating elements. We're going to actually change the colors of these, and we're going to change the arrangements of these. But you can see now the web page actually starting to take shape, even with just the small amounts of work that we've done. We've got some nice elements floating, we've got some different elements on the page, and you can see very little work. It does actually start making a big difference. So let's continue on to the next lecture where we're going to style some of the more other elements. So before we start adding content and styling the other sections, let's just take a look at the footer and start styling that. So again, because it's a HTML5 element, we just go footer. We don't need to actually put a period or a hash. And let's set the height, so say 50 pixels. I want the background color to be completely different to the rest, so I'm going to actually set that to be black, so it really stands out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the color to white, and what that's going to do is set the font color to white, so it's going to give it a background but with a white font. So again, if we now look at this page and we come back, and there we can see that the text is white, the background is black, and it's looking quite good. Let me just do the text align, and let me put that on the right so we can see what that looks like. Look at the page, and that's a good position for that. We can actually do a bit of padding on the right side just to get that across. So let's go padding on the right to be say 20 pixels. So we pulled it across a little bit, and we can do the same at the top, can't we? We can actually go padding on the top to be say 15 pixels, just to see what that looks like. Come down quite nice, and then we may also just want to see what adding a bit of box shadow looks like as well, just to see if that makes any good effect or not. Really, it's a good way of trial and error. We just play around and see what it all looks like. So there we go. We actually have a bit of box shadow, which actually doesn't look too bad actually. But the point is that by playing around, a lot of the styling is about you actually seeing what it looks like, seeing if it looks good for how you want it, and you know, getting that ideal style for you. So there we go. We've styled the footer. We've actually got that standout different color. We've got some shadows around there, and it's getting there. It's actually getting to a point which I'm actually liking so far. So now that we've done the footer, in the next lectures we're going to just restyle these left and right divs to add a place where we could put content onto the web page. Okay, so we're kind of nearing completion of our first website. But what I want to do next is just do something with this left div and right div. So we know that one's called left div, one's called right div. So if we go to our style sheets, we already have a left div and a right div in there. So what we want to do is we want to start changing the background color. For a start, make the same as all the other ones, so the background colour to be hash that. There we go. And then again hash that to make it consistent with everything else. But what I want to do is I want to actually start changing the size, doing the float left, etc. So let's start with the left div. Now we've got our background colour. So the next thing I want to do is I like to set the float left on this one. And next, let's make the width. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to make it 40%. So you can be very specific in pixels and EM with the size, but by using percent, it kind of looks at the size and it takes the 40% of the current size. So I like using percents when I do this kind of thing because it can vary depending on your viewport. Let's make a bit of padding, and we'll have padding at 10 pixels, and that's going to be all round rather than on a specific size. And what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to add a border to this, and I'm going to make this 2 pixels and a solid. So what we're saying is we're going to have the border of size 2 pixels thickness, and it's going to be a solid border. And I'm also going to have a margin of 20 pixels. And there's our left div. Now let's save that. Go back to our web page, and now we can see we have this left div here. Okay, so let's go back to our code, and for the right div I'm actually going to more or less have exactly the same. So let me just copy and paste that in there because it saves a bit of time. But I'm going to set this one to float right. Okay, just to force it to go onto the right hand side of the page. So there we have our float left and float right. We can make these a little bit bigger when we start putting content in there, but it's just a matter of seeing what it looks like and, you know, having it all kind of set out and all that kind of stuff. Now I could actually remove the borders. I may do that in a moment. I just put the border on there to see what it looked like. But let me go back to the code and let me go back to index. And what I'm going to want to do actually after this is I'm going to want to do my other div clear. Just to remove all the float and positioning. Save that again. Come back to our page, and there we go. It's put the menu, but the footer right at the bottom again, which is what we wanted. Now, at the moment, it doesn't really fit with the everything else having that border. So we've seen what it looks like. We don't necessarily like it, so we don't think it fits with our current one. So easy enough. Let's just remove the border from there. We either have a border on one thing or we have a border on everything. And what we can do is, I think we want to maybe reduce this to 30 pixels at the bottom, just to pull that in a bit closer. There we go. And what we probably want to do is make the height of these boxes more specific, just to make it look a little bit better. So let's just add a height on there, and let's make that 200 pixels, and let's do that with the other one as well. Let's copy and paste it. Just makes it look a little bit more sized, you know, so as if we've got more content on there. And there we go. It's actually, you know, looking quite good. It's we can see we've got different elements in there. You can imagine that we'd have some images or text in here, and what we'll do going forward, we'll add a little bit of content to these boxes just to make it look a little bit more. But the only other thing I want to do very quickly while I'm here, I want to add a little bit more size on the bottom of our header here, because the shadow's falling off there. We want to actually maybe fix that before we go any further. So let's go back to our header and let's add a bit of padding at the bottom, just at the bottom of say 30 pixels. Let's see what that looks like. There we go. Just increase a little bit, because then it actually makes it look like those buttons are actually part of the header. So there you go. We've now added the last positioning of the elements on our web page. All we would do from here is just add some content to the left and right. Adds a little bit more content to maybe this hello, welcome part here. Add a bit of code to handle the entering of the information in these boxes, and obviously update the pages. There are one or two other things I want to show you very quickly to enhance what we can have with our menu, but they'll be in the next lecture. Okay, for our next assignment, what I would like you to do is, having now watched me build this page, I want you to go and repeat the process, build this page, add content, and then post me a link. I'll add my files as downloadable content from this video, and you can compare the two. Okay, so let's start adding some very easy, simple, non-code based animation to our menus. And the first thing what we're going to do, we're going to have it just change color when you go over a menu item. It's used lots of times on the web, very easy to do. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to say my nav menu, link, and then my A. So my this is where we set it up here. We can see the A is the actual link, the where the href is going to go, the href. And then what we want to do is we just want to say hover. So whereas up here we said for our link and our visited, we want to set the background color to aqua, we want to make a display block. We're not going to change any of these attributes. All we're going to change when we hover over this A link is we're going to change the background color. As I say, it's very easy to do, and let's make it a nice aquamarine color. Save that. Now all we do now is, oh look, when we go over it, it changed to a nice aquamarine color. As I say, it's a very easy animation or type of animation to add, something that's quick, something that relies on no code needed, and it looks good as well because you can see when things are actually being hovered over. You can use this in any element. All you do is use the hover element or the hover attribute of any element. So that's how to add color change when you actually hover over a menu item. One thing I love about CSS is the 2D transforms. I believe this was added in CSS3. I'm not quite sure. If anybody knows it coming earlier, let me know, but I'm sure it was added in CSS3. What they did was they added some transforms to allow you to do some animations like rotate and various other things. And you don't need code for it, it's just a CSS styling. One of the things that came in is something I love to use on menu items. Now, like where we had to use a WebKit and a Mars and the border radius for the border radius to allow us to round those corners, we have a similar thing with the transform. So I'm going to add the three that I know of, one for things like Safari, one for if it's Internet Explorer, and just the standard one. So first one is WebKit transform. I like to add all three just so as you know they're there if you just need them. So we say it's called scale, by the way, 2,2, and then we've got MS, and again transform, again scale 2,2, and then let's put the semicolon at the end, and then the transform on its own. See, it actually picks it up if with the autocomplete. There we go. Added all three. Let's just save that. You could leave the aquamarine in. You could remove it if you want to when you see what this does. I'll leave it in for the moment. But what this actually does is boom, boom, boom. It actually makes the button jump forward. See, the shadow jumps forward and everything. It's actually, I think it's a great little cheap animation to have to allow you to really highlight when they hover over a menu. I just think it's wonderful, and it's simple and it's easy because it's just a CSS command. There are other in the transform, as I say, rotates one. I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but there are other things that are in there, transition and stuff like that. But I think the scale one's quite good in this case for doing these menu items because it really does make the menu stand out. So that's another very easy, cheap animation for your menus that gives some good impact. So welcome back. As you can see, I've made a couple of changes to the web page and I've added some content. I wanted to do this before we came back to the video because it took time to add the content, basically. You can see that I've actually filled in this left and right div. Now this is showing you the page in Safari because in Chrome I have it zoomed in so you can actually read what I'm doing. But this is what it looks like as a kind of an overall view. And you can see that I've filled in the left and right. I've got a couple of images. I've got some different text. And I'm just going to go through that now with you to explain that, to show you how you do it in the CSS and what I've changed in the web page. So as I say, this is it a little bit zoomed in so you can actually see it a bit better. So the page, as I say, we've got some nice fonts and so on, and some images. Everything else is quite the same. But if we go back to brackets and first look at index, you can see what I've done is, well, in the welcome I've just added a bit of text in a P tag. P is paragraph, remember? So I've added that in there. And then in the div, in the left div, what I've done is I've added an image here with a link back to my page. And then I've put the text, which is a little bit about me, etc. And then in the right div, I've put another image. And then I'll put a bit of text. This is about Christchurch because the pictures are part of Christchurch Harbour. So I just thought I'd put a bit of content in. Now, the thing to note is that this page, this image, is actually bigger, or was bigger than the size of my div. I've actually increased the size of the div because of the font I've used, etc. But it's quite a big image. But when you look at it actually on the page, you can see it's actually quite small. And this one's even smaller, and these were both very big images. If I look at this one, for example, when it highlights, you can see this actually is 2048 by 2048 pixels. The actual size of the div is only around 400 pixels in height. So this would have been masking my entire page. So how did I do that? How did I actually fit it into this small space? Well, that's one of the things we're going to look at. So we've looked at the how to add content. So I can add an image in the div. I can add some text. But then in the styles, what I've done is for my left div and right div image. So what we're saying here is the idea of, so let's go back to the page. Sorry, wrong picture. So for my ID of right div and left div here, and then anything of type image in that ID will be affected by this. And what we're saying is we're setting a max height and a max width of 100 pixels. So basically saying that the image that you put in there has got to be no bigger than 100 pixels in height and 100 pixels in width. And then I want it to float on the right. And then I've done the same with the right div image. Again, the height no greater than 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and then float on the right. I could set that to be 200 pixels by 200 pixels, or 100 pixels by 200 pixels, or anything. But what we're saying is we're actually saying to the the browser that the image has to fit in this case in 100 by 100 pixels, and the same with this. They look a little bit different in size just purely because of how the image is taken. You know, the actual how the dimensions of the image is, but they're no greater than 100 by 100 pixels. So as I say, you do that by actually using this max height and max width, and we do that in just for the image, for the ID of right div and for the ID of left div. So we're actually limiting it, just as I say, to all the images within these ID types. So that's how you'd actually put an image or manipulate an image within the div. And then in the div itself, I've just got the standard stuff, which is the background color, float. So I've already talked about float left, float right, and I've changed the height a little bit to make them a little bit bigger just to fit the content in. So no other changes are in there. The one other change I've done is for the P tag, and I've done this for the entire page. I've actually changed the font. So I'll put a couple of examples in there just so you can have a look at it. The one that's actually taken effect is this bottom one. This is a font that I thought looked quite cool. I just searched on the web for font families and saw this one. But this command font family allows you to set the font that's going to be used. And in this case, I've used the label P, so for all the P tag on the page will be affected by this font family command. So here's an example of using Times New Roman, and then in this case I've actually used a font family of Arnold Bokelin, and it's of type fantasy. See, this Times New Roman is a Georgia type, but it's a serif font, whereas this one is a fantasy font. If you do a search on font families, you'll find lots of information on them, and generally it'll tell you the information you just need to copy and paste into this bit of the command here. So that's how you change the font, and you can do that for both the P tag or the header tags. So if you want to change the font family of H1, you can actually change the font weight if you wanted to. So or the kerning, or the size, or the feature settings, or you can see there's quite a lot there. So you literally do that by just, as I say, using this command font family. You can do other things within this P tag, but in this case I'm just actually changing the font family. So that's what I've done to this page. I'll just refresh because it thinks I've changed something. So yeah, I've created these images. I've used the max height and max width, and then I've changed the font family of the entire page. So these are things that you can easily do yourself to your page. You can change the font style, the family, the weights, add images, lots of wonderful stuff. Change I haven't changed the header types, for example, because that's a header type there, not a P tag. And it's the same with the menus, because obviously they're a little bit different. They're not the P tag, they're the UL. You can change the font family within any one of these types by using font family. So as I say, that's a little bit more on setting some content in your web page and how to manipulate the styling of that content by changing font families, by using max sizes, etc. Now you may notice in this lecture I've actually changed my editor program. This program is called PHP Storm. It's probably my preferred editor, but you do have to buy it. So this is why I've not used it throughout this course. what this allows me to do, and I'm running this under Windows, is it allows me to run PHP with the aid of an install of the PHP or a PHP interpreter. I couldn't do that on the Mac and brackets. There's a possibility you can, but within this program I actually can run it as a debugger because it's specifically written to create PHP and various other web languages. Now that out of the way, this lecture is about the change I made here for this form, and let me just zoom into that part now. So form is a HTML container, and we use forms to hold input types, and then it allows us to submit that information to an action. Now you can see here I've opened the form and I've said action equals action_page.php, which is actually an external PHP page we'll come to in a minute. You can have local functions, but I like using it this way because the code is hidden then. And then we're using method post. There's two methods. You can have post and get. I'll let you read up on that a little bit more, but we're using post in this example. Here we have the input types I created earlier, so my type of name, email, and the submit button, and then we close the form container here. Now going over to the action page PHP, and this is where you get a little bit more because this is PHP, this isn't HTML. But what we're doing, and I'll run through it very quickly, is we're opening a file, we're writing the information to a file, and then we're closing the file. I don't want to go over that too much because this course is about HTML, but form is a HTML container, and it's something you're going to need to know about if you want to create inputs. So let's run this page now. Here we go. First of all, if I type in this and I type in anything and I click submit, notice that, as I said before, it does validation that this on the email, because it's an email type, if it's not in there then it actually says so. Now all I do is click submit, and then it says thank you for your submission. Now that is this line here. If it failed to open the file, it would actually say unable to store your name, but it's supposed to be store name. It's up there. But you see now there's this new file in my directory, and if I open that, we can see here my new entry. That's there because I had to play around earlier. So that's what I've just entered, and that's how you would use your form to get the information from the form and do something with it. Welcome to the section on Bootstrap. What we're going to do in these next number of lectures is create this web page. Looks very similar to the previous one that we did. Designed that way, to be honest, so that we can have some similarity. We can see the way things fit together, how similar they are. But this is written or using Bootstrap, so we can view it on a mobile. It's mobile responsive. We have some nice menu icons up there. Have an input field. It's very familiar in the way it feels, very similar to the previous one. So, as I say, this is a just do it. Take a look at the lectures. Have a go at the assignment at the end, which is just to reproduce this page, and have a play around with Bootstrap. It's really easy to use. Now, one thing I will say is I don't cover every single thing that's available in Bootstrap. I just kind of show you how to put together this page, just to give you a flavour of how easy it is. Then once you want to know more, go and have a search on the web. W3 School has a great bit on Bootstrap. Getbootstrap.com. Place like that. I've got lots and lots of information on Bootstrap. But going through this will get you there to creating your page, and then after that it's just all the extra tweaks you can do. So why not check out the next lecture and start following along in the Bootstrap. Before we begin doing any work using Bootstrap. What we're going to do, like when we started with HTML, we're going to download a plugin. A plugin like the HTML templates one that gives us the template for Bootstrap. Although not overly complicated, there is a little bit more work involved in using Bootstrap, a little bit more work in the basic setup. So using the plugin really reduces the time, and this is the great thing about using brackets and us using brackets in this course. We don't have to spend the time writing the repetitive stuff. So very simply, like before, go to our plugin manager and then just go to the available when it comes up, and all we need to do is search for Bootstrap. Now what we want to do, we want to use this Bootstrap skeleton there. What I'm going to also do is install this Bootstrap 3 snippets, just because sometimes if we want to we can find some snippets, but we're not going to use that in this lecture. Okay, so what we have now is this plugin hit in the file called new Bootstrap 3 document. All you do is create a new file, put it in our directory, call this one bootstrap.html. Okay, just so we know the differentiation. Right, so we have this blank file. We go to our file, new Bootstrap 3 document. And there it is, it's actually filled in the base document. If I was to go and view that, there we go, this is our basic Bootstrap skeleton. You can see that it even says it's created from the HTML skeleton. And we can see, if I was to reduce this, see how that menu changed? This is for mobile apps when you've got a phone or a tablet and the menu is too small to fit on. We get this little icon here. So that is your very first mobile responsive web page using Bootstrap. So let's go and configure it a little bit more, shall we? Make it more your web page. Okay, so we have our web page. What this is using, by the way, just to point out a few things before we go any further, is first of all we can see here we have jQuery and we have Bootstrap. The beauty is we don't have to download anything to use Bootstrap. You must have jQuery available, you must have the Bootstrap, and you can go and download these and put them in the local directory with your web page, and then when you upload it to your server, have those there. But as you can see, we can actually load them from the web. This could potentially means it runs a tiny little bit slower, and I say potentially. There's no real kind of major difference. In fact, I think using this way is much better. We are specifically using a particular version, as you can see here. There are other ways of accessing it, again the latest version. However, if you're building a web page based on a particular version of jQuery or Bootstrap, then we need to specify that. And sometimes downloading it and keeping it local to your web page is better, because you know it's not going to change. The other few things to note before we go any further is just the items that have all these different class names. Within Bootstrap, we are using their own CSS files. You could, in theory, use your own and do a little bit of a change here and there. You know, there's no reason why you can't load in your own theme, CSS, like we did with the previous web page. But in this case, they are actually pre-filled out, and you're using the ones that come with it. There's a few things we can enter as we do. So I'm the author, for example. We can change the title here to be like the previous web page, for example. Just do it. And a few other things you can enter. You can go and search out some of these things yourself. Viewport's a good one that we didn't use. It's really specifying the viewable content of your web page. We could have used it in the previous web page. We don't need to. Here it's a good thing to have, because obviously, because we're making it a mobile responsive website, we need to specify that the viewport is the device width. So the device width would be the device width of a PC monitor that I'm looking at now, a mobile phone, or a tablet. You know, this is just saying use the entire displayable width of that item. There are some other things here. These class names. These class names are very specific to the Bootstrap. They specify to the Bootstrap library a particular meaning, so that when we have the reduction in size, it knows what to do. It's reactive to these names. So these names are required, and you don't change them because they are specific. For example, navbar header, very specific. This one actually has two classes here. You can see collapse and navbar collapse. That's because obviously we have the collapse for the website, but also the navbar collapse when we're doing a reduction of this in size. Same here, nav and navbar. So we're not going to change any of those. The only other one I am going to change, and this is purely because I like to use this specific one, but inside this container here, just within this one here, we're going to add a new div class. Notice it's doing the indentation now, which it didn't do from the skeleton. I'm not quite sure why the skeleton doesn't do that, but maybe it's just not set to. And I'm going to make this one called Jumbotron. Now, if you're wondering what that is, then please do go and check it out. There's a slash div in there. What it is kind of a pre-definition, pre-styling. There are a number of different styles you can use within Bootstrap. Jumbotron is just the one we're going to use here, and it's one I like using. But go and check it out. If you do a Google search on Jumbotron, you're certain to find all the other ones that are available. So that's all the change we're going to make in this lecture. What we're going to do in the next one is start adding more content. Okay, so the way Bootstrap works is it works based on a grid system. You have 12 points or grids across the web page, and as you'll see when we start actually creating content, the particular classes to say how big those are. Now let's just quickly take a look. Now let's just quickly take a look at this page, getbootstrap.com. This is where you would get Bootstrap from if you're going to download it, but it's also where all the information about Bootstrap is held. Now, I wanted to bring you to this page very quickly in that you can see here, first of all, we have different class prefixes. So the one we're going to use is SM, which is for small devices and tablets. If I was to set it for just to be desktops, then we want MD. I'm using SM just purely because I want to set it to be a little bit more for small devices. But MD, or then you could actually have the large, which is, as you see there, greater than 1200 pixels. Then this is our horizontal stack, our grid. So we can have, if we were using MD as an example, same with SM and so on. One is to break it down into the smallest size, and you can see there's 12 across. And you could have like an 8 and a 4, for example, or a 4, 4, 4, which is a common one, or 6, 6, which is what I'm going to use at the moment. You could, for example, have a 4, 4, 4, or you could actually have a, I don't know, a 5, 5, and then have a 1 in the middle. You can see you could have a 1, 4, 1, 4, 1. You could break it down to lots of different formats, but that's the point. It's based on a 12-point grid system, and then you can break it down into whatever size you want. So going back to our web page, what I'm going to do is after this class jumbotron, I only want to affect this part. So we can see that's where that ends. Let's create our first column. But before we begin that, what we need to do, we have to say div class equals row. This is just to put them on a row. Okay, I'm going to put all inside that work there. And then the next thing we want to do, we want to set a new div. We'll say class is equal to col dash sm dash 6, because it's going to take up 6 of those little grids. It's going to take up half the screen basically. And then inside there, I'm going to put my content. Okay. What I'm going to do, I'm going to come across to this page here, my last page, and I'm going to copy the content. I'm just going to copy the text because the images themselves are a bit big. What you could do is you could actually copy the images in there. We could have inside here a second class. Okay. And then what we could actually do, we could have our own CSS control the size of that image like we did in the previous website. But just for now, just to give you the example of using Bootstrap and how we do this, I'm just going to put the text in there. That way you can actually see it working nicely. So then we're going to have another div class equals col sm6 again, because it's taken up 6 of that. And then all I'm going to do again is I'm going to come back and I'm going to copy this second bit of text here all the way to there. And I'm going to go back to my Bootstrap. I'm just going to paste it in there. Okay, make sure it's saved. And then I'm going to refresh the page. And there we go. I have my 2 nice lovely little columns. Okay, so moving upwards through the page, let's tackle this part next, shall we? So we go back to brackets, and all that bit there is within this little part here. Okay. What I'm going to do again is I'm going to go back to my old file, my original one here, sorry, not that one, this one there, and I'm going to go to this little part here, but I don't really want to copy everything because a lot of it there is just a bit of pre-text from my previous to the HTML skeleton. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that bit. I'll go back to Bootstrap. We already have a hello world actually. So let's just take all this out from there through to the MP. Okay, and then just down. Welcome to our new Bootstrap web page. Lovely. Just a quick text. What you'd probably do within there is introduce a little bit more, but I just want to put a little bit of content in there. But what I'm also going to do, I'm actually going to add a button in there. And what this button is going to do is going to just go back to the about. So let's actually put a little bit in there saying, do you want to know more? then click the button. ... Right, okay. So what we're going to do next, we're going to use another class. I'm actually going to put this within a p tag. Okay, and then I'm going to say it's a link. So a class equals button, and also button primary, and also button -lg. I'm actually using 3 classes, as you can see within there. My href is going to be about, okay, because we say we just want to load the about button. The role is of button, okay, and then we want to put some text, and the text is going to be the text that they see on the button. So we'll just say learn more. Okay, now if I was to go to my web page, there we have a lovely button. As you can see, my hello world, welcome to the new Bootstrap web page. And if I click that button, it goes to our About Us page. So that's 2 sections done. We actually have our head. Just refresh that page with a lovely button on, and we have our text. So should we work on this menu? That'll be the next thing, and then one more after that. Okay, so if we were to take a look at the menu within our Bootstrap page, we can see here actually we have our 3 menu items that we see here. Those are all list items, again like in the previous example of our web page. So all we need to do is we just need to change those items for the ones we had in the previous page. Okay, so all we need to do is we go to our index page, then we look for our previous menu items. Here they are. We're just going to copy these 3, 1, 2, 3 there, copy them across to our Bootstrap page. So again, 1, 2, 3. Notice there isn't any special class on the li items, so we're fine with that. There we go. Let me tab this one in as well, just to give it a bit of indentation so we can see what's going on and we can understand. Okay, so if we go back to our web page, let's refresh. We can see now we have our nice 3 menu items we had before. The only other thing we need to do is change this project name here. So if we go back to brackets and then we look up, we can find project name. Let's just change that to just do it. Okay, go back to our web page, just do another refresh, and look, we have our just do it, home, about, and contact us, and of course because we copied them, they work. So there we have a lovely menu, and the great thing about this menu is it sticks to the top. You can change that, but let's just go over a little bit more detail of some of the other things I haven't talked about yet in the navbar for your Bootstrap. So this is our menu, and we can see here we've set the class to be collapsible. Okay, and then we're setting the class for on the UL and ordered list class as the nav. That bit is understandable. The bit that's new is this little section here. Now what this is doing is this is actually setting up the collapsible menu. So when it collapses and it goes beyond a certain point and it goes there, that bit of the code is doing that. So it's actually creating that icon. So these 3 here, icon bar, is actually creating that 3-layer icon bar, and it's making it of type button, and it's setting all that sort of stuff up. So it does all that for you. You don't need to do it. So this part of the navigation, this is all part of the navigation class, as it were, the navbar class. But as I say, within the container here, what we're doing is we're setting up first of all our icon and then also our unordered list, so that if it shortens it, it goes to the icon. All this is handled by these classes, so you don't need to worry about it. But otherwise, it uses the standard text there. All you need to worry about though, because we've used this actual skeleton, is just change your menu items. It's really simple to do. You can have a look and check out what each one of these classes does, but that's all that needs to be changed in regards to our work that we're doing now. The other thing, when I said it's fixed to the top, we can see here navbar top fixed top. You just remove that or change that. Navbar inverse is to do with the colouring of the navbar. What that's saying is it's inverse, so it's black with grey. You can actually change that, and let me just show you what would happen if I remove that inverse there. Let me just go back here and I'll do a refresh. We can see it's white with the blue. So your choice, if you want to have it a nice white like that or black, as I say, entirely your choice. We can see though, if we have it that way, you can actually see the text behind it. So to be honest, sometimes it's nice to have that navbar inverse so that you don't actually get that bit of text. So that's your navbar done. Some of you may have noticed in my previous lecture that there was one thing I actually removed, potentially never copied across in my navigation bar, and that's a class called active. What that does, and let me just show you an example, we added it in. What that does now is refresh the page, and I've also inverted the menu, so this is going to change all back, but it actually highlights the item that is active. So in this case, this is the home page, and I've said in my home page, when it displays the menu, to show index is active. If I was actually in my about me page, let me just put this right, then what I want to do is I'd want to set that to be active. I'll put them both active just so you can see it actually working at the moment. But what it does is it highlights, as I say, the one that is now the current page. So whenever you actually create your web page and you create your different pages, what you want to do is set active in that menu different depending on what page it is. So that's class active. Very good if you want to give an example of where you are in your web page or your website, in fact. Okay, so let's tackle the last part of the web page to make it similar to the previous one, which was the form input. So what we want to do, we want to again do it after this row. We don't want it to be in the same, but what I'm also going to do, I'm going to make this the size of the web page, right? So I'm going to make it a class size of col SM12. So that's saying create this, if I type right, the size of the entire web page. Okay, so there we have our section, as it were, and let me just put a H3 in here saying input your details. Okay, just to your details. Okay, so that's the H3. That's a bit of a header. So next column. So next, let's create the form. In fact, before we create the form, why don't we actually copy the form from our previous web page? Go to the right one, because we want to copy this information at some point anyway, and then we can just change it appropriate to the Bootstrap page. So let's paste that in there. Okay. So let me just tab inline that one as well. So what we're saying is the form action page is the same, the method of post is going to stay the same, and all we want to do now, we want to add a couple of more things. So we're going to say our class is equal to form inline, And there's a reason for that. That's because I want to make it go across the page rather than one after the other. And I'm going to remove the BR tags as well because I'm not having them one after the other. I want it to be inline. And then I'm going to say the role is equal to form. Okay, that's all the changes we're going to make there. Next difference I want to do, inside the form itself, I want to put a new div. Okay, I want that class to be our form group, because all I'm doing is grouping them together. Okay, and let's close that off, and then what we need to do, we need to put that div just before the end form tag here. So let me just go here and go close off that div. There we go. As I said, I want to remove these BRs, so I'm going to do that now. Okay, and what I'm also going to do, I'm going to actually put labels, so I can put a bit of text against them just to make it a little bit more sensical when you look at it. So I'm going to say label, if I can spell today, label for, and then this one is label for name. Okay, and then all we're saying is that is name. There we go. And then again, the same thing here. We're going to say label for email. And then text is just email. Okay, that's just putting some labels in there just to make it look a bit nicer. So the next thing we need to do, we need to go to our input type, and what we need to do, we need to say class is equal to form control. Okay, we need to do that on both, and then finally, because we're using labels, we need to set an ID to what we've recorded in the label. So ID is equal to name. On this case, let's go down to email and say class is equal to form control. Okay, and then ID on this one is equal to email. That associates the label with the input type that we're using. So now if I come back to my web page and I do a refresh of that, there we go, we have our lovely input details form. If I was to close this down, you see at the point where it gets too small, it actually resizes everything, so we can get some lovely sizing on a mobile device. If I input some data, so at me for example, and then I click the submit button, now it won't actually work on this machine because I don't have PHP installed, but it does show that it tries to do the post. So that's how you would add your form on or using Bootstrap. Very similar to the previous website. The only difference is we're using these class form controls to allow us to control the form when we're actually decreasing the size or using a device smaller, such as a mobile phone or a tablet computer. Okay, so let's just finalize the changes to this web page, make it as similar to the previous web page as possible. To do that, I just want to add those images to the two columns. So the first thing I've done is I've created a new style sheet, and all I've done is copied the information for the left div and right div, the IDs that we used in the previous web page to identify the left and the right div. So what I'm going to do next in Bootstrap is I've set the style sheet to be loaded here. Let me just change this to actually the one we're going to be used. It's called BS Styles. S on the end. Okay, so that's now loading our BS style sheet. So what we next want to do is we want to go down here and let's just make the ID of this one equal to left div, and then on the next one down, ID is equal to right div. We could make them classes and have the class in with this class name, but let's just use the ID. Makes it nice and easy and simple, very similar to the previous page, I say. All we're going to do now then is to go back to our previous index file, and I'm going to copy this image into my left div here, and then go back again and copy this information for the image into the right div. Let's just save that off and go back to our web page, do a refresh, and there you go. We've got our images back, we've got our lovely menu, we've got our change here. We could even put a logo in there, but hello world, or I could call that just do it, or anything like that. And then we have our columns with our images back and the text, and then we have our input form. As I say, you can change as much as that with your own CSS. We just need to do more in this BS styles to change and add IDs to allow us to change or format the text as we did in the previous example. But see how easy it is to use Bootstrap? See how easy it is to create a mobile responsive website? So simple, very easy. So go and have a look, try reproducing this website and have a play around. Okay, so time for your next assignment. What I want you to do is just go and reproduce this web page. Get to grips with Bootstrap and have a play around. I'll include the code for this web page against this assignment, but try it for yourself, see if you can do it, and then compare it to the code that I've done. Very simple assignment for you guys. Hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the section on animation. During this section we're going to be doing fades in, we're going to do rotations, we're going to do fades out, and we're going to do movements. So by the end of this set of lectures you'll understand how to set up animation on your web pages and how to apply it. At the end there'll be an assignment for you to follow along to just recreate this page. To achieve the animation, we're going to be doing this using CSS in HTML, but to achieve it there's a couple of things we need to understand, or we will go through to understand as we go along. The first thing is keyframes. Now if you've ever created any kind of video, you've probably seen what a keyframe is. It's basically a point in the animation that something happens or you're going to do something. And to get animation working well in the CSS HTML, you do have to do some work with keyframes, and they kind of look like this. But we'll go through what they are and how they work, and you can do more complicated ones such as these. And to give you an idea, if we look at this page here, this is just something I've been putting together to show you a few animations before we actually start working on them. So we can keyframe things like that rotation. We keyframe, if I was to refresh this, the fades in. You see these all fade in, everything else fades in, and we keyframe fades out and moves such as that. So all these are handled by using keyframes, and we'll look at those as we go along, because for some animations we don't need to keyframe that much, but for some we need to keyframe more. So this is just sort of showing you what can be achieved, and what we're going to do now, we're going to start making some of these changes to our existing web page, and we're going to add some of this new animation functionality, and you guys are going to follow along, and by the end of this you're going to know how to do animations such as these rotations, fades in, fades out, and even moves. Okay, let's start with the easiest animation to think of, and that's fade in. What we're going to do, we're going to create the keyframes in this lecture. And when you think of it, we have two states for a fade in. You have invisible and visible, or opacity of 0 and opacity of 1. And let's write that as a keyframe. First, I'm going to make a little comment here, say animation elements, yeah. And this is how you actually put a comment in CSS, with the / asterisk and then close with asterisk /. So what we want to do, we want to create a keyframe that says go from opacity 0 to opacity 1. So we do that by going keyframes. Okay, that's the instruction, and we're going to give it a name, so we're going to call it fade in. Yeah, and then what we're going to do, we're going to say that this goes from opacity of 0. Okay, and then it's going to go, let me put the semicolon on the end there, which I missed off, and then it's going to go to opacity of 1. Let's close all that down, and there you have it. So this is literally saying this keyframe goes from opacity 0, invisible, to opacity 1. Now what we need to do, like with the other transform element we did before, etc., we need to actually have 3 of these. We need to have one for the standard CSS3, one for WebKit, and one for Moz. Now this is to make sure that we have all the different web browsers supported, because obviously some will support just the standard CSS3 keyframes, and then some will be WebKit keyframes, and some will be mod keyframes. But having all 3 in there means that you're actually supporting all 3 of those different things within different web browsers. So now that's just created our keyframe fade in, which we're going to be using it in our fade in CSS setup in a moment. So we'll do that in the next lecture. Okay, so we have our keyframes for the fade in effect. What we want to do now is we want to actually use that. We want to create a class that we can use within all the objects we want to have fade in. So what we're going to do, I'm going to write the CSS first, and then we're going to add that class to the elements. So because it's a class dot, I'm going to call it fade in, and then within this I'm going to actually put all my fade in CSS code. So first of all, I want to start with opacity of 0. It's got to be 0 because we want it to be invisible. 0 opacity. If we ever do 1, then it's not going to work. So we want to start at 0, and then we want to go from 0 to 1. So the next thing we want to do, we want to actually use this keyframe. So what we do, we use the animation, and then what we do, we pass in the keyframe, so fade in. We want it to be an ease in effect, and then 1. What we need to do, we need to do that again for the 3 different ways, using WebKits and Moz as well as the standard CSS way. So let me just copy that, and we'll just paste it, and we'll just add the elements we need on the beginning. So for this one, we want to say WebKit animation, and then for the next one we want to say Moz animation. So that sets up the use of the keyframe. The next thing we want to do, we want to use the fill mode, and we're just going to use that as forward. So we go animation. You can see the fill mode in the list there, fill mode, and we just say that's forwards. Okay. Again, copy and paste that and do the 3 ways of doing it. So first one is WebKit if you know that you're never going to run it in a browser that just use the standard CSS3 way, we'd only ever have the one. The problem is you can't guarantee what they're going to run, so we want to actually put all three in there so that we know we're covered for the majority, if not all, the browsers. Okay, so that's the fill mode. And then the final thing we're going to do, we're going to actually set the duration. So you got animation duration, if we can go down to there, up one, there we go. And what we're going to set this at the moment is just 1 second. Again, let's just copy that, and then again fill in the elements we need, WebKit, and then Mars. Right, so that's our CSS done for the fade in effect. All we need to do now is add this class to the elements we want to fade in. So let's start with our logo. Okay, we have an ID, but we can still attach a class to this. Remember, ID is that we're only ever going to use it once. Classes, we use it numerous times. So we go fade in on the logo. Okay, now let me go to my page. If I do a refresh, there we go. We saw the logo fade in. See? Really simple. Now I can go and I can add this to individual elements of my web page. For example, I want to add it to the nav menu, so I would have a class there. I can still just put the fade in there. Remember, we can have lots of different elements in there. And if I want to add it to the entire body, I can actually just add it here. Put the right name. Of course, the one problem with this is it affects the entire body. If we wanted to actually have different timings, because what we could do, we could have another class and we could have different timings. So we could have this, say, use a slow class as an example, and that slow class might actually have like a separate set of timings in there, like 2 seconds fade in, for example. By having this here, we're actually controlling the entire page as a fade in, which is a quick way of doing it because it fades everything in nicely, but you might want to have things fade in separately. Anyway, as you can see, that's our fade in effect, and you can attach that class to anything. Very simple. As I said, all we have to do is the keyframes and then use those keyframes in an animation, and then just attach that class to anything you want to within any page that loads that CSS file. We could in fact have it just attached to the text. We could use the span and have it in that text. So that's how you do fade in animation using HTML and CSS. Okay, so we've defined fade in, but how do we do the fade out? Well, again, pretty simple. The reverse of what we've already done, actually, to be fairly honest. We start off with the keyframes. So let me just copy these three here, because basically it's exactly the reverse. So this time, just change the fade in to be fade out. Let's change it in all the places. And all we're going to do, we start at an opacity of 1, and we're going to go to an opacity of 0. As I said, the complete reverse of the fade in. Okay, so now that's the keyframes done. In the next lecture, we're going to write the CSS, which you can probably guess, again, is very similar to the fade in. Okay, so let's define the fade out class. Now, as I said, it's going to be very similar to the fade in one. So to save us a bit of typing, let's just copy this and let's paste it. At the end of the day, when we have repetitive code, it's very easy just to copy and paste and just change what we need to. It saves you spending a bit more time doing the typing than you need to. So with a fade out, obviously we're going to start with an opacity of 1 because it's visible, unlike the fade in where it starts invisible. And then all we're going to do, we're going to change these fade ins to fade outs. And then final one, and we'll just do the one above. Seems I've messed up. Obviously my keyboard jumped there. So there we go. That's created the fade out class, and I can use that class wherever I want to use the fade out functionality. However, in the example you saw earlier, I had it on a hover. And what I did in that case, I actually created a new class called 3. I could call it 2, I could call it 1. It was 3 in that case. In this case, let's call it something different. Let's call it my fade out. Okay, and then I add that on the hover functionality, and then all it is just to copy this and paste it in here. So now I have this new class called fade out, and on the hover it runs this code. So let me take that and let's add that to something within our code. So let's go to my index page and let's add it to here. My fade out. Okay, that's what it's called. My fade out. So now whenever I hover over this newsletter, it should fade away. Let me just go to the page. Let's do a refresh. Or fades in, and then that fades out whenever I hover over it. You can have a bit of fun with people, couldn't you, on that stage? It's like, oh, sign up for our newsletter. Oh no, you can't. Oh no, you can't. So yeah, as you can see, you can actually have a bit of fun with the fades out and fades in. Very simple to do. They're just the reverse of each other. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the menus here to go from this grow to the rotation that you saw in the example. To do that, first we're going to do the keyframes, and then we're going to move on to do the code bit afterwards. So going back to brackets, let's go back to our styles.css, and then this one's going to be rotate. Okay, I'll just put that in there so as you know, because this starts where the keyframes start to get a little bit bigger and more complicated. And again, we have to repeat them 3 times. Let's start with the first one. Let's call this one my rotate. Rotate, if I can do the keys there. Now, I'm going to do this in just 4 steps. Okay, you could do this in a number of steps to make it smoother, but I'm actually just doing it in 4 just to show you for quickness. So the first one, the first keyframe is at 0%. Okay, and at that 0%, what we're going to say is the transform rotate is going to be at 0 degrees. Okay. The next step, I'm going to say 25% of the rotation, or 25% of the animation, I should say. The transform rotate is now going to be at 90 degrees. Then at 50%, and you can see where this is going in a second, my transform rotate is now going to be at 180 degrees. It's gone all the way sort of round, and it's now upside down. That's 75% transform rotate is now going to be at 270 degrees. And then finally at 100%, my, let's make that closer, transform rotate is now going to be at 360 degrees. Now, as I say, you could actually make that in smaller steps. You could say 10%, 20%, 30%, and have smaller turns to make it a little bit smoother. But I'm just doing this for quickness. I'm just going to have those 4 steps, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat this and add my minus WebKit on that one, and then my minus Mars. So there you have it. That is our keyframes for rotate. In the next lecture, we're going to be using those to rotate the menu buttons. Okay, so in this lecture, we're going to use the My Rotate keyframes to animate the buttons. So let's go up to where we currently have the buttons being animated, which is on the hover here. And at the moment, we actually have them doing this scale. So let's just comment that out for now. Now I could of course just said transform rotate here if I'd have really wanted to. You know, I could say it to go say 90 degrees, turn 90 degrees or 180 degrees, but I could just do that. To actually have the animation run, I need to do the keyframes as I've done. So what we need to do is we need to use those keyframes, and of course it's all in the animation. That was called My Rotate, as we see there. So we go My Rotate, and then what we're going to do, we're going to give that 3 seconds to run, and then it's going to run for infinite. Okay, and let's just copy and paste that. All we're saying is continue running, going on and over again. So continue rotating whilst we actually have this hovered over. So we don't want it to go and then stop. We want it to continue rolling round and round until actually we've completed with what we want to do, or we've moved away from the actual menu item, as to say. So anyway, WebKit and Moz. Okay. So let's just save all for now. Let's just actually clear this up a little bit here to make it look nicer. Right, so if I go back to my web page and I do a refresh, and there we go, we have the animation running, and it's on all the buttons. See, you could make it smoother, but actually that's not too bad, even just the 4, and it's great how it looks like it's above everything. You know, you can actually see it above the logo. So that's how you would do rotation on something like hover using keyframes and the rotate. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to set up a move in the animation, or moving animation. And I'm going to change it slightly from the example I showed you earlier, because I want to actually show you it being used for something other than just moving a div around. I want to animate my header in the welcome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say at keyframes, because again it's keyframes. I'll call it my move. Okay, and then at 0%, what I'm going to say is my left position is 0 pixels, and then at 25%, my left is now at 225 pixels. At 50%, it's going to be at 450 pixels. At 75%, it's going to be back to 225 pixels. And then at 100%, it's now going to be back at 0 pixels. Right, so let me just copy and paste that so we have all three types of that. So we have the WebKit, and we have the Moz. Right, so that's my keyframe setup for my move. In the next lecture, we're going to be using these to animate the header text. So now we've set up the keyframes, what I want to do is apply them to this bit of text there, the header 2 in my welcome div. So very simple to do. What I want to do is I'm going to say for my welcome div, I want to access the H2 element. Now I need to set its position to be relative for this to work, and then I'm just going to say animation my move for 5 seconds and infinite, and then again just copy that, paste it 2 more times, one for WebKit and then the other one for Moz, and finally just close that up, come back to my page, and there we have it. I have now got animated text in my welcome. So you can play around and do kind of sliders if you follow this through a little bit more, because when you think about it, you just make sure the left is greater than the size of text, and then set it to begin on this side. So that's how you do movements within animation on your web page. In this case I've applied it to header, but you can apply it to any element that you want to. I could have applied it to images, I could have applied it to the box, even the logo. So that's animation. We've done rotation, movement, and fades in and fades out. So for this assignment, what I want you to do is go away and add the code to the web page that you have to recreate this animation, to do the rotations, do the movements and the fades and everything else that's going on this animated page. I'll include my code along with the assignment so that you have that to compare with. So go and play and reproduce this page. So we've got our web page, we've got the index page, and we've got a few fields on there, but we want to fill out the contact us page. We want people to be able to contact us via email, and we don't really want to give away our email address on the page. It's much better to have a nice contact us page, a page where they can fill in their details and submit the email from there. So what we're going to be doing in this section is we're going to be creating a contact us page. We're going to be using HTML5, a little bit of CSS3, and some PHP. Now bear in mind this course isn't about teaching you PHP. You can do courses on PHP much better than I'd be teaching it here. But there is a need to use some PHP just for the post email element of the page. And we will be creating that PHP. You can follow along and use the PHP that we create. So, are you ready to create a contact us page, get into some more HTML, CSS, and learn a little bit of PHP? Then step into the next lecture and start. So to create the contact page, the first thing we need to do, we need to go to our contact HTML page that we have here. And we just want to delete what's there. And then what we want to do, we want to go to our HTML templates and we want to get the HTML5 template. While we're here, let's just change this title so that we get a nice title to the page called Contact Us. So what we now want to do, we're going to create a number of input elements on the page to allow us to enter name, email address, message. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually put those inside a set of a field set, as it's called. It kind of links everything together. It gives a nice sort of visual element to the page, so all the elements look like they belong together. So to do that, we just go to our body where we want to start, and we just create a field set. Okay, very simple. Okay, so this is where we're going to be putting all our elements for the contact us page, and then let's surround that. Actually, what we really want to do before we do that is we also want that to be inside a form. So I want to create a form, and let's get that form a nice name, just in case we want, just in case we want to actually do any styling to this later on. So we call it contact form, and we give it name exactly the same, just so it's all consistent. We're going to have a method of post, just like we did before, and our last set of fields that we put up for the on the main page, because obviously we want to be able to post the elements to our PHP. And what we're going to do, we're going to create an action, and we're going to create something a little bit later on. I'm going to call it post. If it goes to the right place without it jumping, it's going to be called post email .php. Now I've not created this yet. This will be something that we will be creating later on, and let's do that close form after my field set. Right, and let's just tab indent this and this. Okay, so next thing I want to do, final thing for this lecture, is I'm going to actually give this field set something called a legend. Okay, and that basically sets a name to the field set so you can visually see it. And I'm going to show you this in a second. Again, let's just call that contact us, and let's save that. And then what we will do, we will see what that looks like, and it will give you an idea of what a field set is and what a legend is. Right, so this box here is a field set, and the legend is this title here. So what we're going to have all our elements for the contact us inside this box here, and it kind of gives it, as I say, a grouping feel. So in this lecture, we've added a HTML page to our contact us. We've created a new form called contact form, which has got a method of post and is going to be posting to a script which we have yet to create called post email.php, and then we created a field set. In the next lecture, we're going to add the elements to the form for creating an email. So the way I'm going to create the form, or the elements of the form, is I'm going to actually use a table. A table is going to allow me to format it better. It's going to allow it to look a lot nicer. And in the past, many people, before they were these elements of grid systems about, they used tables to create their own grid system. It's what grid systems really are. It's just a table which has a set size and set elements, or number of elements. So we're going to create a table. Okay. And then what we're going to have to do a number of rows of the table. So we're going to have a new row. Right. And then inside there, we're going to have table data. So the first one, we're going to say it's got a label. Okay. And that's for name, because this is going to be a label for our name field. And then that's just going to be name. Okay. That's that table data complete. And then we do one more. And this is going to be of input type equals text, because we're just text for our name. And then the name is equal name. Let's put some quotes around that. It's not the quotes. Okay, and then our ID is equal to name also. Again, this is if we feel like styling or anything like that later on. We can do that using the values that we set. And we're going to use a thing called placeholder. And what this does, it puts text in the fields that gives you a hint of what you want to put in the field, or what you should put in the field. So this one's going to be enter name. And for this first one, we're going to set the auto focus to be equal to auto focus. Reason is we just want it to auto focus on this when it comes into the page. Okay, so that's that table row complete. That's our name. So let's create a new table row. And then this one is going to contain our email. So TD, and then we go label for equal for email, and then email is our label, and that row, actually you don't need to do that one. And then the next table data row again is going to be input type is equal to email, because it's an email input. Name is email, and the ID is email. And then again, we're going to have a placeholder equals to enter email address. And then we're just going to close that one off. Notice we don't have the autofocus on this one because we only want autofocus on the first field when we come into this page. We don't want it to be getting confused. Okay, so that's our second row done. So another table row, and this one is going to be for our message. Okay, so first of all we have a TD, and then again we have label for message, and then in this one, instead of using input, we're going to use a thing called text area. Okay, and that's going to give us a big box to put some text in for a message, because obviously this is going to be a message field. ID is equal to message, so they're the same. And then what we do, we give it the columns, which we're going to say is equal to 45, and we're going to give it rows is equal to 5. And this is kind of limiting the size of the text area, just so we've, we're not allowing it, or we send the size so that we know how many columns and rows, or that the text area knows how many columns and rows when it builds it. You can increase that if you want to. I'm just going to set mine to 45 and 5, and then we're going to have a placeholder, and then we're going to say enter your message, and then just close it off, and we close off our text area. So now if we just save this, and then we just have a look how that looks. And now we can see the making of our contact form. We've got our name, our email address, and our message. The only thing we need now are buttons to be able to send that message, and also a second button that we're going to use to reset it, because on most contact pages you can actually reset the content. So all we need to do is we need to have another table row. Okay, and for this one, what I'm going to do is, this won't much make much sense, but it's to actually put everything in line. I'm going to actually have a blank TD first, because this moves. Notice we don't have any label for this one, so there's nothing on the left. So this TD is in replacement of the label, so that the buttons line up nicely with everything else. So again, we have a next table data row, and then we're going to say input type is equal to reset, and this is our reset button to clean everything out. Name is equal to reset, ID is equal to reset, and then value is equal to reset. Okay, and then we're not closing down the TD at this point, just the input type, because we're going to have a second input, and then the type of this one is equal to submit, because this is our submit button. And then I'm going to call it send, and I'm going to give it an ID send, and then value is equal to submit. Now you could actually call the name and ID submit, but I just like to call them send so I know what they are. And there we have it. Now if I just save that off, and let's take a look at this now. There we go, we've got a nice reset and submit button. So if I was to type something in there and I don't like it, reset clears it out. Same with the name, and reset, and submit won't work because we're not running PHP, but you can see it tries to submit it. So there we have it. That's our base contact us page with a contact us field set. There's one last thing I want to do to bring it in line with the web page before we build the PHP, and that's just to give it the same menu and the same styling, because at the moment it looks completely out of it. We can get to this page from our web page, but we can't get back. And all I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy and paste some elements from our index page. So the first thing I want to do is copy the CSS link, because we're going to use the same CSS. We're going to reuse some of the divs. Okay, copy and paste, reuse. This is the thing about, you learn about object-oriented programming and things like that, is you reuse things. So this is obviously not object-oriented programming, but it's the same principle. And let's change the title while we're there as well. So what I'm going to do from the index, I'm going to actually take the container div, and the header. So that's going to give us all the menu items, and it's going to give us the nice container. So if we go back to my contact page, and then just here, let's just copy that, and then down here we can close that div off. Okay, and then let's just tab indent all this form, and then we can actually tab indent that, and tab indent this to get all nice and lined up. Okay, so if I now look at that, we have our nice header, we have our menus, we can navigate through, but this element here is still very different. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to go back to our index, and I'm going to choose a container that we have there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the welcome div. Okay, all we need to do is copy that little bit there, because this has all the styling already created for it. So we'll go back to our contact us, and then just around the form, I'm going to add that in, and then at the end of the form, I'm going to close off that div. And then I can tab indent that form one more time to bring it in line. I'm going to save all that. And now, if I now look at that page, there we go. The formatting's there. We have our nice similar type boxes. So there's no real kind of difference when you look at the pages. They all look the same. So now that we've styled it, the next thing will be to create the PHP. So we've created the page. Now we need to create the PHP script. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a new file. And we're going to call this one postemail.php. Note the .php, that's because it's a PHP file, or it's going to be a PHP file. And we can again use the standard HTML template, because we need to have some HTML in there for it to be understandable. In theory, you could just have the PHP, but it's nice to have it surrounded by a true HTML template, just in case we want to put some HTML content in there. And again, we could just do a couple of things if we wanted to. We could just create the title and call it post email. Not that it makes much difference, but what happens is when you actually click or it gets posted, it'll load this page. So you can have content in there to say nice title, have a message completed, back, all that kind of stuff. So the only other thing I'm going to do to actually create PHP, and as I said in the first lecture, this course isn't about teaching you PHP, but you will learn some aspects of it. What we need to do this, and that says, this is the start of some PHP code, and then at the end of the PHP code, you just close it with a question mark and a close bracket there. So everything now within this part here will be PHP code. And that we're going to do in the next lecture. Okay, so let's start creating this code. So, first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new variable, and I will talk about variables in a second, called my email address. And I'm going to assign this a string of my email address, which is sean.t.cameron@gmail.com. Now, the reason I want to talk about strings is in PHP is not a strongly typed language. Now, what that means is that if I create a variable in something like C++, C, etc., you give it a type. So you give it an integer, a char, a string. And then everything you put into that variable has to be of that type. And there's some validation in some parts of that if it's an object, but if it's very strongly typed in that you create something of a integer, so you have to put an integer into it. with PHP, there's you know, to have put a type, it's not strongly typed, which means that whereas I've given this a string, I could later on use the same variable and give it an integer value, and it's quite happy with that. So it doesn't do that kind of validation on the variables. So that's why it's not strongly typed, as opposed to something that's a strongly typed like C++. That's enough. I just wanted to explain that very quickly. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a subject. You noticed in my previous creation, I didn't create a subject line. That's because I'm just going to give it a bog standard subject so that I know that it's come from here. So you go question from just do it. You could easily have you know, a subject line on your web page. I just chose to create it statically just to have, you know, I always know it's come from this particular page. Now this next part, I'm going to create the variables that are passed in, and what we do, we say post. So this is something that's been posted into the page, and from the name of it, called name, you could probably guess it's going to be name. So this is coming from our name field in our previous page, and that's now being deciphered by this $post and put into this name variable. So the next thing I'm going to do is email. Same again, and then this is equal to $post, and then again it's email, semicolon, and then next one is going to be message. We tab that in, sorry, and then that's equal to again $_post, and then guessed it again, message, and then the last thing we're going to need is a header, and this is required for our mail function that we're going to call. So we're going to say $header is equal to, and then from, and then you just type this as is, and then we say $name, and then open bracket, also brace, or whatever you call that, less than, I'll call it, so that's the easiest thing to call it, and then we've got a $email. Okay, and that is basically setting up a header saying, you know, when you open up an email, if the email has a header that has this from name and email address, and that's how they know where it's come from, etc. And then next we're going to use the function mail, which is a PHP function, and we pass in $my email address, okay, and then comma $subject, comma $message, comma, and then our header, which is the email address information. And that's it. That is actually the PHP code to post all the information that's sent in from our contact us page. You could have some a message saying outgoing, say P, thanks for sending. Actually, we don't want that inside the PHP, we want that outside the PHP. Okay, so we know that. Otherwise it gets interpreted as PHP. Thanks for sending. There is output commands that you can use in PHP, but it's easy just to use a nice P tag from within the HTML. So that's our PHP code done now. That's our PHP code completed. Let me just have indent that one, make it all nice and even. So I can't run this from my local machine, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload this onto my web space, or a web space which has PHP, and then we're going to run it and show it working in action. So I've uploaded the contact.html file, and I've uploaded the postemail.php. I've uploaded it to this site, one of my sites, yourtechguys.co.uk, because at the moment it's the only one that actually is running HTML5 and is not running WordPress. I've got a few running WordPress. So let's just fill this format, shall we? Let's zoom in a little bit so you can see it. So let me start by putting my name in. Oh. And then let's just go Sean at Your Tech Guys. Now this is the email, the return email, remember. I'm just putting that in as an example. I don't actually have that email address, by the way. And this is a test email. Okay, submit that. There we go. It says thank you for sending, which has come from my PHP. And there we go. The email has just come in. You can see it there. So that's the basic contact us page. We could, as I said, put in a link to say go back here. We could put menus. We could put a lot of things in there. At the moment, I just left it very basic, but as you can see, it works well. The only thing that it doesn't have, this is, as I said, a very basic contact us PHP page. It doesn't have things like capture, verification, validation. They can be added, but to begin with, this is how you create a contact us page using PHP and HTML5. Okay, so guess what? It's time for your next assignment. And you may have guessed it, but just in case you didn't, what I want you to do is I want you to go away and I want you to recreate the contact us, or the contact as it is, HTML page, contact us page, as well as the PHP to send the email. So go away, do that, and then compare it with the version I've done, which I will attach to this lecture, and so to get used to using it, get used to creating it, this simple contact us page, because it's very useful, very easy to expand on. So go and do that and then come back after. So by this point we've done the practical, we've created the HTML document and the CSS styling sheet, and we've got that whole web page created, and we've had a little play around. What I want to do at this point is, and as I said at the beginning of this course is a practical guide. It's a just do it guide to creating a web page. But I wanted to reach out at this point now and start looking at some of the theory, talking about some of the things we've used in the creation of our HTML5 and CSS documents, those instructions, and just to give you the kind of the extra information about them, just the theoretical stuff, because again, as I said very early on, I like to learn by doing things practically, but then I like to actually be able to go back and look up the commands used, get a little bit more information about them, get to understand them more. And that's what this section is really about. It's about learning a little bit more about those instructions so that you can reinforce what you've already learned. So without further ado, let's get on with it, shall we? So the first thing we're going to look through is all about HTML5. And the first thing in HTML that we're going to look at is the doc type. So the doc type must be the first thing in a HTML document. You can't put it at any point below there. It can't be the second or third thing. It has to be the first thing in the HTML document. And doc type is not a HTML tag. What it is an instruction to the browser informing it which version of HTML the page is written in. So in our case, the doc type is HTML, and the browser knows that that's HTML5. If it was HTML4, it's got something different in the doc type. Always try and use so that the browser knows what type of document it is. Now, the browser will still load a HTML page if the doc type isn't there, but it's always good using things like the doc type and other things as well, so that the browser gets a better idea of what the document is and can understand it better. There's no misinterpretation. For example, say for example you wanted your page actually to be HTML4, by not saying that in the doc type it won't get treated the same way. So always try and use it so the browser knows what type of document it is, and also the version of that type as well. So the next thing that we want to go through are the HTML tag, the head tag, and the body tag. So a HTML tag tells the browser that this is a HTML document. Remember, the doc type tells it what sort of version it is and what type of document it is, but this tells it that it is a HTML document. HTML is the beginning and the end tag in a HTML page. So after the doc type, the first thing will always be HTML, and that designates the beginning of the HTML page. And then the closing HTML tag is the end, and everything in between those two, the browser knows what it's going to pass as HTML. It signifies that between its tags is HTML content. It is the container for all HTML content except the doc type. And as I say, we've already talked about this. Next, let's talk about the head. So head defines the head element part of HTML page. Head is the container for all the HTML page head elements, and it contains page elements such as the page title, scripts, styles, meta information, and much more. So this is all the header information for your HTML page. Next we have the body, and the body tag defines the body elements of the HTML page. So within the body tags, all HTML content is written and includes things such as text, hyperlinks, images, tables, lists, and much more. This is the part of the HTML document that is all the bits that you're going to see on the screen. So the header, or the head, defines all the head information, meta information, and the title of the page, for example. But the body is all the script that you're going to see on the screen as a HTML page. In this lecture, I wanted to look at the header, footer, and section tags. These are something that's been pulled into HTML5 and really give us great benefit. So header represents a container for introductory content and all navigation menus. Typically it may contain one or more heading elements, logos, icons, menus and things like that. Before HTML5, designers would use a div to section off the header. So we'd create a div and then we'd give it a class or an ID of header or something similar. But with the new HTML5, we actually have a header section already. Footer is very similar, but footer defines the footer section of the HTML5 page. It would typically contain items such as authorship, copyright, contact information. But also could contain sitemaps, menus, related documents. You could even have your social media links in there and various other things. And again, before HTML5, designers would generally create the footer section using a div. Finally, section is used to define sections in the document. It is generally used to section off parts such as chapters, headers, footers, and any other section of a document that you would like or need to create. It allows you to section off, as we say, the page. You know, you could create a heading section, a graphic section, image section, text section, and so on. And it's just there as another kind of way of sort of breaking up your page and making it more readable. You don't have to use sections. You could have sections and have divs inside those sections, but it really is just a new tool that allows you to define sections and makes it more readable. So in this lecture we're going to talk about divs. So a div is used to define a division or a section in the HTML document. Previously we talked about section. Div has been around a lot longer than section, and it's always been used for defining a division and lots of different sections within the HTML page. It can be used to group block elements to format them with CSS. So what we're saying there is you can use a div and then you can give it an ID or a class name, so that inside the CSS we can add format to everything that's within that div. So as an example, if you wanted to have a div where you would have like a different font as an example, you could create a division in the document. Now when you look at the page on the browser, unless you change something like the background color, you can't tell there's a division in the text. It could be just one big flowing text. However, you could create a division and have some of the text in that division, and then in the CSS you might want to make that part of the text a different font or a different font color. You know, you could format various things. So this is what we're saying when it's used to group block elements together and then format with CSS. So that's divs. Allows you to get divisions within your web page. So having just talked about divs, it makes logical sense to next talk about class and ID. So class is used to specify a section in your HTML page and is used in conjunction with items such as div, UL, and various other things. And then it's used in the CSS to associate styling with the elements on the page that are within that section. And there we have a little example where div class equals test. That would then define the class test with this div, and everything that's within the opening and closing div will be allowed to style with CSS by using that class name. The same class name can be used in multiple places in the HTML document. So styling can be used on multiple items. So what's that saying is that the class test, I could have 3 or 4 divs in the same HTML page that use the class test, and I could have a UL as an example, an order list with that class, and I could associate it with a number of other things. Next we look at ID, and ID is similar to class, but unlike class you can only use the ID name on one element in the HTML document. So if we associate a div with an ID, then it could only be used once, and it's a very similar format to class, except whereas in the previous we have that div class equals test, we'd have div ID equals test. But as I say, we can only use it once within the HTML document. That's the big difference between ID and class. Class you can have a multiple items, multiple tags. ID it's only one. But like class, ID is then used to associate styling to the section using CSS. So in this lecture we're going to talk about span, which some of you may not have heard of, and it's a very useful tag to have. So it's used to group inline elements in a document. Unlike div, span does not have any automatic formatting and so has no styling change in itself. So what I'm saying is that if we use span in a line, you will see no formatting change unless you actually specify that. So when used on a tag link such as a P, it allows you to add styling, and this example shows us that within P we have some text, this is, and then we open a span and we say the style equals color red. Important is the text, and then we close the span and then the final word is text. So that what that would say is this is important text, but what would happen is the important in that line will be red. So it's actually setting the color of important to red. So span allows you to do that within a P line. It makes no other formatting change, but it allows you to actually, as it says there, group inline elements, and then everything within the span tag is associated with the styling. In this case, if I had any other word in there other than important or with important, everything in there will be affected by that style, and we can do other things such as change the font family. So that's span. It's a very useful little tag to know and use. I've named this section P is for paragraph, and what we're going to be talking about is the P tag. So the P tag defines a paragraph in your document. So whenever you want a paragraph of text, it's enclosed within an opening and closing P tag. And it has predefined formatting, which can be changed. The browser will always add some space, a margin, before and after each P element. So, as in with a paragraph in a book, when you see the formatting in a book, you see each paragraph normally has a bit of space above and below, so you can separate the paragraphs. And that's the same thing that the P tag does in your HTML document, or rather when you're viewing the HTML web page in a browser. So the P tag allows you to create paragraphs of text and does all the pre-formatting for you, but you can actually add more formatting to it, or you can change the formatting depending on what you want to do. As I say, as standard, you will always get some predefined formatting, which is quite nice in itself. So that's the P tag, and probably one of the most used tags that you're going to use in your web page. H is for header. So the H tag has various values. So we've got H1 through to H6, and they're used to define HTML headings. H1 is the most important and goes down to H6 as the least important of the headings. Each of these have their own predefined formatting, which includes things like font style, font size, and you can change the formatting of H tags within the CSS. So what that means is H1 will be the most important header, H2 the second most important, and so on down to H6, H6 being the last heading setting or value in the H series. And as we say, we can change those in the CSS and change the font, the colour, and various other attributes within the heading tags. A is for anchor. The A tag defines a hyperlink, which is used to link to another page. Well, that's what a hyperlink is. The most important attribute of the A tag is the href attribute, because this defines the hyperlink. So it defines the address that this tag will go to. A attribute has a default styling, such as colour of the hyperlink, but this can be changed with CSS. You can do various things. You can change the text decoration, you can change the color, and various other aspects. The most important thing though is that the A tag defines a hyperlink, so it's used commonly in things like menus and so on. IMG, img, is for image. So the IMG tag is used to define an image in a HTML document. There are two required attributes, source and alt, although you can get away with just using the source attribute. But it is advisable to use the alt attribute, as this also helps with SEO. To break that down a little bit, the source src attribute is the file which is going to be used for the image, so within quotation marks. Alt is a bit of text that kind of describes what the image is. Used to be used in browsers that didn't display images when it was first come about back in the 90s, but these days it's commonly used for screen readers. So if a screen reader is going through the HTML document, for image it will read the alt attribute of an image. So it's very important, and it does help with SEO. So remember, source tab, image, alt is a little bit of text that sort of describes what the image is. UL and LI. So UL stands for unordered list. UL has some predefined formatting, such as items are bulleted, but this can be changed in CSS. And you use the UL tag along with the LI tag to create an unordered list of items. So the UL is the unordered list tag. That's the start and end of where you would create your unordered list, and LI are list items. So we use those to create the list within the UL tag. And as we just said, LI tag stands for list items. LI tag can be used with unordered lists. It can also be used with ordered lists and menu lists as well. Each LI element is one item in the list. So one UL will have many LI items. So imagine your UL is your block, and then inside there you have many LI items, as many as you need in your list. So when we create a menu, we might have 3 menu items, which means we have 3 LI items. Input. So the input tag is used to specify an input field, somewhere where a user can input data. Generally used with inform elements to create input areas. Inputs can be of many different types defined by its attributes. Now, in our web page we didn't put them in a form because we were just creating an example, but generally we would create a form element, and as part of that form element we would have something that would say this is a put or a get type of form, which means that when you press the select or the button that you associate with it, it either does a put or a get function pass through to whatever function it's going to call. But in our case we didn't do that, so this is why I'm saying here that generally it's used within a form element, and you can look at forms a little bit more. But we also saw that we used 2 different or 3 different types actually with the button. There are a number of different types that can be associated with input, things like password. A password, what it does is instead of showing the text, it puts asterisks up automatically. So this input type is something that you would need to go and have a good look at if you want to create input fields, and generally it can be used for quite a number of different things, but in most cases you would want to use this with some other functionality like JavaScript or PHP, so that you can actually do some processing on the information that you pass in. That's beyond this course. We're only looking at HTML and CSS, but it's something for you to go and do at a later date. We've now come to the CSS part of our theory. In this part of the theory, we're going to look at the CSS styling that we used, some of the commands we used to style, so that you get a little bit more information and understanding on the CSS commands that were used and how they were used. So the first part of the CSS theory we're going to look at is element, class and ID. So an element of HTML are tags such as the P, the A, image, and those kind of things. And they also include the new header and footer. So these are predefined elements in the HTML. And when we use them in the CSS styling sheet, we just use them without any predefiner. So whereas with class and ID, we have to prefix with a hash or a period, full stop. With the actual elements of HTML, we don't have anything in there when we start the definition or when we start the styling. So we just put like header or footer. A class is a user-defined item in the HTML. When we want to create some styling for a class, you need to prefix the class name with a period. So you'd put dot and then the class name open brace. And what this does, it allows you to style all the items that are defined within the class or that class in the HTML. So it's kind of like a grouping so that you can style everything within that group. ID is very similar to class, but the difference is with a class you can use it more than once within a HTML document. So you can have several groups predefined with the same class. With ID, you can only have it defined once in your HTML document. And to style the CSS for a ID, what you need to do is you need to prefix it with a hash. So you'd have hash and then the ID name. And like the class, it allows you to style a group of items that are grouped under the ID tag. Background color and images. So background color, the background color property is used to set the background color of an element. The element could be anything from the body to the header to the div, an individual div, a class, all divs. The background of the element is the total size of the element, which does also include any padding and border. So if you have a class, for example, which is a div, and you have any padding in there, the background includes all the padding and the border. And you can set using a color name. So for example, red, black. You can use a hash value. So we all know you can get hash values of particular colors, or you can use RGB and then inside the brackets have the R and the G and the B value. So there's a few ways of actually setting the color. Background image. So the background image property is used to set one or more background images in an element. By default, a background image is placed at the top left corner and is repeated horizontally for the size of the element, again including padding and border. What potentially happens is the background image will be repeated if it's smaller than the size of the element, although there are extra functionality, extra properties you can set that have a no repeat option, so that you would only have the image in there once. So that's background images, and that's used to set the background images in your elements. Padding and margin. So padding is used to set all the padding properties in one declaration for the element, class or ID it is used in. So passing in 4 values sets the padding in the following order: top, right, bottom and left. So padding 10, 10, 10, 5 in this case will set the padding at the top at 10, the right at 10, the bottom at 10, and on the left as 5. If you just pass in one value, then it sets all 4 of the values to that one value. So if you said just padding 10, top, right, bottom, and left would actually just be set to 10. Now there are some other variations, but why don't you go and check those out for yourself? There's plenty of resources on the web, but I recommend the W3 School because it's a great place. Margins set all the margin properties for the element, class, or ID in one declaration. So like padding, the order is top, right, bottom, and left. And also like padding, you can either pass in a number of values or one value which would set all the 4 margins. Again, go and check this out at the W3 School. There are a great set of information on the combination of values and what parts of the element, the class or ID or element they set. So in this lecture, we're going to take a little look at float. So float is used to specify whether or not an element should float. By setting the value, every element after is affected by the float value unless you use the clear command. And we can use various things such as floating images, the text wraps, etc. So what float does in essence is it's a positioning functionality. You will use float, say float left as an example, within your class or ID CSS, and what that does is it takes the object, let's call it an object, but the ID or the class element, and it will float it to either the left or the right or whatever you specify. So in that context, if for example you have a div, okay, and inside that div you have an image and you have some text, what you can do is you can set your image to float left or right, and what happens then is the text will flow around that image. It's a nice effect. However, everything after that float command will continue taking the same effect, so it will kind of carry on to the next value will float left and the next one will float left. So what you do, as we've did in our web page that we created earlier, you need to use the clear both, and what that does, it resets that float value, as it were, the element, so that it stops using the float. So float basically is used to allow you to set the position of an element within your container or your div, which is a container in itself, inside the container it's in. Float, probably one of the most used commands you will use when doing your CSS styling. It's amazing how many times you use float. So let's examine font family and font weight. Now, font family is used to specify the font property for an element. It's used to change the font used on the element that it is used in, and it can hold several font names as fallbacks, so that if the browser doesn't support the first, it will try the next font. So text obviously is a big part of your web page, and we know that there are many types of fonts that you can use. Some fonts better than others. Some fonts make things look, a particular way. You may want to have a particular feel, and the font will kind of build that. And what font family does, it allows you to specify the font in an element, so in a div, or say your header, footer. And when you use the font family property, as it says there, you can pass in more than one font name or font type, so that what happens, if the browser doesn't support the first one you come across, say it's Cosmic Sans or something, it doesn't support it, then it will go to the next font in the font family command, and it will try to use that font. And it's because some browsers potentially don't support certain fonts, so it allows you to have those fallbacks. Font weight is used to set how thick or thin characters in the font should be displayed, and it's used as an example to set bold fonts. The whole concept of font weight is to set, as it says there, the thickness. So if you want a bold font, then you can set the font weight to be strong or bold, or certain elements. It allows you just to have thicker text in particular parts of the sentence that you want to throw out or make very visual. Text align and text decoration. So text align is used to specify the horizontal alignment property of the text. And it allows us to set text to be either center, left or right in the element it is set in. So it is just a positioning tool. It allows you to set a piece of text to be on just the right hand side, the left hand side, or the center of that element. Text decoration, the property allows you to specify a particular decoration to be added to the text. So it's used to set text to be things like underlined, line through, etc. And it can be used to set to none. So for example, if you wanted to remove the underline from a hyperlink, then you would set the text decoration to be none. That's one of the things is commonly used for example, in again a menu where you're using a hyperlink as a menu piece of text. You don't want the menu to have underlines, so you set the text decoration to none. So the next subject I want to talk about is an attribute called list style. So this property will set all the list properties in one declaration. Properties that can be set are list style type, list style position, and list style image. Can also be set to none to remove any styling. So to break it down, when we created our menu, we used a list. We used an unordered list. But what we wanted to do, we didn't want it to have the styles which came as standard. We didn't want it to have bullet points and all that kind of, predefined styling. So we use list style to remove those and create a nice unstyled list, something that we could then go and style ourselves. So list style, something that you will most likely use when you're using lists to create menu items. Next, let us take a look at border and border radius. So border is used to set the border property in one declaration, or all the border properties in one declaration. We can set the border width, border style, and border color. And you can set all three in just one if desired. So there are other properties that you can set where you want to set, say, border at the top, on the right, bottom or left, but just by using the border we can say border 10 pixels solid, or border 1 pixel solid, or border 1 pixel red, or basically you're setting the border width and the style being solid and the color all in one declaration, and that's what the border property does. Border radius is used to set the radius property of the border. So we use this property to set rounded border corners just by passing in a value in pixels. So when you see those nice rounded corners on a box, the way you set the rounded corners is by using the border radius property. And generally if you set something like say 5 pixels or 10 pixels, you get a nice rounded corner. So something to go and have a play with, as we did within the web page we created earlier. Box shadow. So box shadow is used to attach one or more shadows to an element. Values passed in refer to the horizontal shadow, the vertical shadow, the blur of that shadow, and the colour we want the shadow to be. So in essence, box shadow creates our lovely shadows to give it that 3D look, and in one command you're setting, as it says there, the horizontal shadow and the vertical shadow, and then an amount of blur. So typically you might set the box shadow to be 10 pixels. Both those are the size of horizontal and vertical shadow. 5 pixels, which would be the blur, and then you might set it to be, I don't know, black or hash FFFF or some value that you want it to be. I think it tends to be F88888. I think I set it to normally. But the point is, we use box shadow to give it that nice shadow to give you a lovely 3D look. Transform. The transform property applies 2D or 3D transformations to an element. You can do things such as rotate, scale, skew, move, as well as a few other things to an element. It's a great way of adding animation to your HTML document. In essence, the transform property gives you the ability within HTML and CSS to add animation to your web page. You can do some wonderful things with rotations and scales and moves and skews. It really is giving you a lot of power without actually having to do any Java or any code whatsoever. It's a wonderful, wonderful property to use. Certainly something that you can have a good play around with in your web page and have some great fun for people that come to your web page. You saw in the web page that we created, just by using scale, we're able to make the menus go larger when you hover over them. Think of it this way, what if we used rotate instead of scale? What if we used scale and rotate? Enlarge and rotate 360 degrees, for example. Try playing around with it. Transform is a great property and gives you a lot of functionality, bang for buck. Hi everyone, I'd just like to say thank you for taking this course. I hope that through this course you've actually learned this knowledge and the skills that you were looking to learn. Hope you followed along and just created the web pages as I've created them, and in fact I hope that you've actually played around and done a little bit more, because that'd be great. You know, actually the whole point of the course is for you just to go and do it. Just do it. So what I would like you to do is, if you've created a web page, send us a link so we can have a look, and we can maybe share that with everybody else, you know, so everybody can see the sort of things that you are doing. Now, if you've enjoyed the course, the first thing I was going to ask you to do is to leave me an honest review. You can do that by actually clicking the write a review button up the top right here and just leaving a review. As I say, honesty is the best policy. Leave me what you think is an honest review. The second thing is, any questions that you want to ask, then do so by using the add discussion button here. Now this is going to put a discussion that everybody can see, everybody can contribute to, and certainly I will answer, usually within 24 hours, but generally a lot quicker than that. Normally it's within 8 hours, depending on if you do it in the middle of my night. So certainly leave those, and as I say, I hope you've enjoyed it, and let me know your thoughts. Thanks again, and bye for now.